Hi, I'm Case Lowe, co-host of the Open the Voice Gate podcast. The one question I'm constantly asked when it comes to Dragon Gate is, how do I get into the promotion? Well, stop asking and start listening to the Open the Voice Gate podcast, released every Wednesday on the Voices of Wrestling podcasting network. For exclusive news and show reviews, look no further than the leader in Dragon Gate coverage, Open the Voice Gate.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Gentleman's Wrestling Podcast. I am your host, as always, Jesse Collings, and this is a very special episode of the podcast. It is episode 100, and I wanted to do something a little bit different than a normal episode for episode 100. So what I did was I reached out to a bunch of people in wrestling media and the wrestling take sphere, and I wanted to invite all of them to come on to the show. And I thought a fun gimmick would be for them to give us a hot take they have about anything pro wrestling related. It could be about, current product. It could be about something historical in the past. It could be about wrestling fan and media culture. Really anything as long as it was related to pro wrestling. And I got a great turnout, great responses. So I have put this episode together. It is a bunch of different segments with different guests, most of whom have been on the show before, but we have a few first-time guests who were able to share their opinions with us. The segments are about 10 to 15 minutes per guest, and I thought it would be really fun. They are out of order in terms I filmed a bunch of them on different days, so I kind of put them all together in different orders. So I don't know if that really matters, but if there's any like inconsistencies and takes or things like that, it is merely because my brain turned to mush trying to put all these together and recording a bunch of different Zoom calls over different day span. So thanks so much for all the listeners who have gotten this podcast to 100 episodes. I wouldn't have lasted this long if it wasn't for community support and getting people, always anytime an episode is posted, telling me that they're really looking forward to it, that they really liked what I had to say, and that really started some really good conversations and changed the way I've thought about wrestling in a lot of different ways through this show. So I want to thank everyone, and please enjoy this 100th episode. All right, we're here with our guest. It is Rich Kraetsch. Rich, of course, as many of you know, but if you don't, just a reminder, he is co-host of the Flagship Wrestling podcast and the Flagship Wrestling Patreon page. He is also the chairman, the captain, the owner, the CEO of voiceofwrestling.com, and probably wouldn't be doing this episode if he wasn't involved. I probably would have given up at some point, just from an infrastructure standpoint. The VOW site and Rich have been super helpful in getting this podcast off the ground and continuing its incredible legacy, stretching across an amazing 100 episodes. But thanks, Rich, for joining the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm doing the CEO dance, but it looks awful. Let me tell you. Thank God this is not on video. I'm doing the CEO thing, and it doesn't look good. So I'll just stop doing that.
Can you dance at all?
No, my God, no. I'm a 37-year-old white guy. I can't dance at
all.
Well,
like some people like can dance, like that can surprise you. So I don't want to stereotype that, but I also cannot dance.
No rhythm, no flow. No, it's bad and self-conscious. Like that's the problem with it too. Like I might be okay, but I don't even want to try to find out if I'm okay. I just
at a wedding,
at
a wedding and stuff. Do you go like on the dance floor?
I'll do a little bit. But I try to like find a pile of people and get near the pile of people just so nobody looks at me and goes, look at that guy. I don't want to be like that person where the people that aren't dancing are like, get a load of that dude. He can't dance at all.
You just kind of gotta be with like whoever you're there with and just try to like move your arms a little bit. Don't look like super stiff.
What's good though is at white person weddings they'll always play like dumb songs that everybody can dance to, which is quite a so you get like they'll throw in the fucking chicken dance and the YMCA and then like the Cupid shuffle and stuff, and it's like anybody can do those. That's not a problem. So the actual need to really get down and really dance, you don't really have to at most white people weddings. So that is a nice thing that they do for us is keep it very basic. And give us like point in, similar to a WWE main event. A lot of times they will tell you what they want you to do, and then you just have to do it. So it's a lot easier.
Like the cha-cha slide.
Another one. Yeah. Slide
right.
I can do that.
Yeah.
Crisscross. I can do that. Great. Yeah, that's no problem.
Yeah. All right. Rich, what is your hot take gifted to us?
Okay. Well, first off, I want to say congratulations on 100 episodes as well. That is an amazing accomplishment that does not get done a lot. Like people think that's, it's a podcast, it's a wrestling podcast. 90% of wrestling podcasts last like 5 episodes. You know what I mean? Because it's a lot of work, and
Yeah,
you hit record and you're like,
it honestly is just like what's keeping me going really is I kind of come up with I feel like interesting ideas that I want to talk about, and this is a creative outlet to do that in, but also just like pure pride of like I want to be built for this. I don't want like I don't want to be like a graveyard podcast like so many are.
absolutely. No. And the topics definitely, it lends itself. What you're doing is different than what a lot of other people do. And I think that's the key to having a podcast that lasts 100 episodes or 200, 500, whatever it may be, whatever it may be, whatever your legacy may be, is coming at it on a completely different angle. And everybody else, reviews Raw and reviews SmackDown and
I would be
reviews
dead.
Dynamite.
I would be dead if I was just doing reviews.
But you have decided to carve out a niche of, hi, we're going to have this big picture topic and we're going to focus on this big picture topic. It might be one question, it might be one promotion, it might be one thing, but it's an idea and a concept, and I think
the whole gimmick was like, it's not going to be hot takes, and then my 100th episode is just like a bunch of hot takes.
Well, hey, you know what? This happened to me at voicesofwrestling.com. I went to go get married. This was what time? 2016 when I went to go get married, and I was like, okay, guys, I can't do anything with the site for this like weekend or whatever. You guys have to just take it. Like normally I'm like, I have my laptop, but I was like, this weekend I think I have to kind of be out. So do whatever you guys want with the website. I don't really give a shit. And they all decided, because I always said I didn't want listicles. Like the thing I hated the most at that time, because that was what all the rage was in internet internet journalism.
Like 7 wrestlers who blew it at me.
Yeah, right. That was like all sports journalism was that. I thought that we were never going to dig out of that. I guess I'd actually like that to come back given where we are with sports journalism. But like, yeah, even like every Bleacher Report article was like 9 free agents the Lakers should have, look at to try to acquire.
Those were all gimmicked. Those were all gimmicked because they were slideshows.
Exactly.
So
Bleacher Report slideshows. Yeah.
Which each click would be another click on your site. So if you
Absolutely.
just had a listicle, you would get 1 click. But if someone clicked through the entire slideshow, it would get 10 to 15 clicks depending on how long.
Exactly.
It was entirely a gimmick to game that system.
Yeah, and it worked pretty well for Bleacher Report until it didn't work for Bleacher Report. But then everybody started to copy it. So yeah, I was gone that weekend, and they're just like, we're just gonna do all listicles on the website all weekend. And the worst part about it is, it was like our most successful weekend that we've had. Like, in terms of page views, like, because people love the slideshows. People are like, oh wow, 7 best WrestleMania main events. Oh, cool. I'm gonna check that out. Like, we still get clicks on some of those articles, and I'm like, oh god, it just pains me that's what people want. But you know what? Hey, now this is what people want. They're gonna want the hot takes. So all right, you ready for my hot take?
I'm prepared.
All right. WWE Raw is moving to Netflix. People look at Netflix and say, wow, everybody has Netflix. Netflix is this gigantic thing. It's massive. We just saw the Jake Paul Mike Tyson fight had 55 million concurrent viewers. Whatever it may be.
Those numbers are worked, man. I don't believe that shit for a second.
Yeah.
I read not in the Observer, but in the Figure 4 Weekly this week. I read the numbers that they were claiming, and I was like, I don't know about that, champ.
I also don't know about those numbers too, but that kind of gets to my point is everybody assumes that this is going to be a massive, massive deal for WWE, and Raw is going to start doing insane numbers, and people that haven't watched wrestling in 2 decades are going to watch it again because they're going to pop onto their Netflix, and they were going to try to watch like whatever the hell, some true crime show, and then Raw is going to pop up on their feed, and they're going to go, oh, never mind. I'm watching Monday Night Raw. I haven't watched Monday Night Raw since the 1997, but I'm going to watch it again. I haven't watched Monday Night Raw since 2001. It's the time to jump back in or whatever. I do not think that's going to happen. So my hot take is that Raw moving to Netflix is going to be a negative for Raw and a negative for WWE. In terms of overall money, we talked, there's many podcasts that have talked about that. We talked about it on the flagship. If you really dig into the contract, it's not really a great deal. It's a pretty bad deal for WWE. They're taking less money to go onto Netflix with a bunch of outs and different stuff. So there's real possibility that the Netflix thing, they have an out in a couple of years. So if things don't work, Netflix can just say, we're good. Thanks for everything. You can hit the bricks. But people just assume that Netflix has this giant user base, which it does. That's undeniable. And that this giant user base is going to, in some small part, start filtering in to Raw and watch Raw every single week. I do not think that's going to happen.
Yeah, my stance is we don't know what the impact on Raw and Netflix is going to have. I would say if gun to my head, I'm leaning towards it's going to be an overall positive, but I definitely see a scenario where it gets buried. It eventually gets buried on the Netflix carousel, and you take it off of the institution of USA Network, and it doesn't end up working out as people get more distracted. I definitely think there's a population out there that, primarily younger fans who just are not going to tune into a cable show live, that will tune into a Netflix show live. But there's a ton of other variables about being on Netflix that I think we haven't really seen explored yet. So I think it's a complete unknown. What
Yeah,
do you think
I
is
tend to
negative
think,
about it? Like, what do you
yeah.
see happening?
Well, the exact thing that the thing that you kind of said, a lot of Netflix content is very fungible. You know what I mean? It's very like it's up there, but if the algorithm decides it's not for you, if they're this is what I'm interested in to see. Are they just going to shove it at the front of every single thing that you see? Is constantly here you go? Because I'll tell you,
Okay.
the Jake Paul Mike Tyson fight, I was on Netflix 2 days ago. It wasn't showing to me right away. It was the first week. Like the first week it was on, it was one of the first videos that showed. It kind of auto played while I was on Netflix, which by the way probably leads to a lot of those views that you're talking about there. But as of a couple days ago, it is no longer there. It's, I'm sure I can find it. I'm sure if I dig around a little bit, I can find it. But, I'm someone who probably would be that target demo if they're doing the numbers and looking and digging. I'm that target demo that, this guy should be interested in this fight. He hasn't watched it yet. Let's keep sending it to him. Let's keep sending it to him. Let's keep sending it to him. And it behooves Netflix for, Raw to be successful and the live events to be successful because they want to go that direction. They want to sell ads on it. They want to do that sort of stuff. I mean, they're not going to they'll make even more money if people watch these things live and then you can give them insane ads, every single, commercial break. I just don't know if it's going to be that way. I think, you're going to get a lot of people that it might pop up as a live thing when you're there live, but I am not sure that Netflix wants to sacrifice all of their algorithm and all their other content to make sure that every single person that gets on there knows that Raw just streamed. Raw was on yesterday. Raw was on earlier this week. It's Thursday. Oh, you missed Raw on Monday. Oh, it's Friday. How you missed Raw? I mean, that is, they're going to sacrifice all of their content and all their algorithm and everything to make sure that you get force-fed Raw. I don't know.
Yeah, I think the first few weeks it's going to be like a huge push because of the size of the investment that Netflix has made in WWE. That being said, maybe they've changed their strategy a little bit, but Netflix blows money all the time. Like, okay, they're paying Raw all this money, but like they'll like have like some $250 million budgeted movie coming out
Yeah.
1 week, and that's going to replace Raw as like the top thing they push, and eventually, they have the NFL games, which the Raw money is going to be peanuts compared to eventually what they're going to be paying for all these different live sports rights. I think that it's in danger of just kind of being lost in the shuffle, as opposed to when they were on USA and it was their flagship programming for years and years and years. The other thing I'm curious about is like Netflix stuff. The way Netflix works is stuff gets extremely popular and then it gets replaced by something else.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen this time and time again with shows that seem like everyone was watching them for like a week, and then like a few months later, you're like, "Oh yeah, remember? Do you remember the show Beef?" This is a good example.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Like there was,
Squid Game.
I was like, see, I feel like Beef is a good example because like I think it was like earlier this summer, like last summer, like there was like a week in time where like a lot of people were watching this show called Beef, but then like 2 weeks later, no one was talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
There's a couple things like Stranger Things that have kind of become consistent enough hits. But even then, they're only really big when their episodes come out, which I guess is wouldn't theoretically be a problem because the new episode comes out every week in Raw. But I'm just curious to know, like stuff on Netflix can become extremely popular, but it rarely has staying power. And you could get a lot of people to tune into that first Raw, but we've already seen this with like when WWE aired SmackDown on Fox. They went all out for that Fox debut. Like was like 4.2 million people tuned in to
Mm-hmm.
watch that. Those people did not stick around. So, are we going to see a similar thing with Netflix? Are people going to watch, Raw live and sit through those ads and stuff like that? Like people don't watch things on Netflix live. I guess they watch this Jake Paul fight, but like if you're a Netflix viewer, you watch shit on your own time. You're not tuning, clearing out your Monday nights to watch Raw.
it's going to be fascinating because Netflix wants you to start doing that. Netflix is going to want you to start popping onto there every single day. They want to be your hub where every single day you go on there and you check and you watch live stuff. But I don't know that they have enough live stuff yet for that to be in the life cycle. Like you're going to know now, oh, the Paul, Tyson fight's on. Cool. It's on Netflix. Cool. I'll load up Netflix on a Friday night and turn that thing on. Oh, hey, the NFL games are going to be on there. Great. It's like the Christmas Day games, I think, right? So, okay, Christmas Day, I'll pop up Netflix. But I don't think they've yet figured out a live sports system where you just know, hey, I'll pop onto Netflix and there'll be something for me to watch live. It's going to have to still be, I want to watch Raw. That's you see what I'm saying? Like it's still you're going to have to pop onto Netflix on Monday night because you want to watch Raw. I don't know that every the whatever the user base of Netflix is going to be is just going to check in every day and say, oh cool, Raw's on live, I'll watch live now, because that's what everyone's banking on. People are banking on not necessarily wrestling fans going on there, which also, and I know I'm a little bit over time here, so I'll wrap this up in a sec, but also the idea that wrestling fans that have gotten this free program for years and years and years and years and years, obviously they pay for cable, they pay for whatever, but after that point, they just have to pop on USA and watch it every single week, and there it is. The idea that now they're going to have to pay, whatever monthly fee is for Netflix, and they have a lot of different tiers, and then be inundated with ads, for which by the way, I don't know if they've said this yet, but I do wonder if even on the highest tiers, you're still going to get ads on Raw, because they're going to want to serve ads on that show. The reason you do live sports is to serve ads. The reason you do live sports is not to get subscriptions. So I do wonder what it's going to be like and how many wrestling fans are going to say, oh, okay, cool. Yeah, I'll spend $20 or whatever a month to buy the ad-free tier to watch Monday Night Raw every single week. That's a big ask. It's a big ask.
I hope they have ads, and I hope like a lot of streaming services, like there's like 3 ads they show.
Every single commercial.
Yeah.
Break.
And every single ad, it's just like an ad for like Sky Rizzy, an ad for Chevy, and an ad for American Express. And that's just all you get, over and over and over again.
Those are the 3 that always Sky Rizzy. How about the budget of Sky Rizzy? I'd love to be in the marketing team of Sky Rizzy, man. They are eating well over there.
Everything gets cleared there. Like Sky Rizzy, and then there's like one of the weight loss ones. Like that they show like just constantly. It's all I watch is Sky Rizzy and those weight loss ads.
Yeah, it's pretty good. Yeah, but no, I'm curious. I'm that my hot take is that it's not going to work as well as, because people think it's just like you just do it and then you wipe your hands and all of a sudden 10 million more people are going to start watching Raw that weren't watching Raw. I'm not sure. Plus, let's add in that Netflix still hasn't had a very successful live stream yet. They had a Love Is Blind thing that did as horrific as the Paul Tyson fight. Paul Tyson, obviously an absolute disaster in terms of being able to stream it live. We're going to see the NFL games. They cannot fuck those ones up. They got it, whatever they got to do. They can't fuck those games up for sure. And Raw, I do wonder. And I know a lot of people are like, well, don't worry about Raw because fewer people are going to be watching Raw, so it's not going to be a problem. I don't know if I'd be that excited if I was WWE and Netflix said, don't worry, way less people are going to watch your show, so it's going to be fine. Like that's kind of the sell that they're going to say, like, well, look, 60 million people tried to watch this and our servers crashed out. Way fewer people are going to watch yours, so don't worry about it. We'll be good. I like to actually see it be good before I believe that it's going to be good, because that's also going to be an interesting thing too, because you might lose a lot of user confidence too.
Yeah, like 2025 WWE's business variables, I think, are really interesting in terms of what does this Netflix move look like? What does this John Cena retirement tour going to be like? Is he going to work a ton of matches? Who is he going to be feuding with? Because I'm like a fan. I'm a big believer, like John Cena's subsequent, like his recent work in WWE has been horrible. So, like, are they going to use him to put over like Braun Breaker? Or are they going to use him to like have a CM Punk feud? Because one of those things is going to draw big, and one of those is going to come across flat. And then, like, is The Rock going to be involved at WrestleMania? What are we doing with this Bloodline angle? Nobody wants to talk about the Bloodline angle.
Given the success of whatever this dumb Christmas movie is that is not successful, I would say yes.
See, people keep saying that, but then, like Moana 2 is coming out like in a couple weeks, and that's going to make like $1 trillion.
Yeah. I still think The Rock's going to... I think that he's just waiting. He knows he's got all the power. He's just waiting for them to book the Royal Rumble and book their Mania, and then he's going to say, all right... The Rock's here. What do you
that would be great for WWE, but I just, without The Rock, this Bloodline angle I think is going to become really cold at some point. It already feels cold. Like I feel like that Sami Zayn reuniting thing should have been like, if this thing was still hot, would be like a major angle everyone is talking about, and instead it's like SmackDown did its like lowest number in a million years last week. So, all right, thanks, Rich.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
All right, our next guest on the show, he is the host of the Mr. Warren Hayes Show, and he is also our bureau chief out in French-speaking Canada. It is Mr. Warren Hayes. Welcome back to the show, Warren.
By the way, I'm still waiting for that laptop here at the bureau, Jesse. We're still working with the abacus and notepads, stenographer pads. So just putting it out there.
Yeah, international shipping being what it is, sure. I can assure you it's in the mail.
Okay. I've heard it before.
Yeah. So Warren, what is your take that you're going to share with us today?
Interesting. The show that doesn't have hot takes, and we're talking about hot
please,
takes.
Please do not make that joke. Everyone has made that joke so far. And by the time people listen to you, there's going to be like 100 of those jokes, and it's going to drive the viewer crazy.
Well, okay. Well, listen, I did it. Proof positive that we haven't, talked about this. We haven't talked about the content, and it's a surprise for everyone, or a surprise for Jesse anyway.
No jokes about there being hot takes. And I've had enough on-air congratulations for this being my 100th episode. I think
damn it. Okay.
When this is all put together, it's going to drive the people insane. So I'm okay with that.
All right. I'm not necessarily a hot take guy as well. That being said, I think this is the one that came up to me and that I always sort of like have in the back of my mind. And I was thinking of what is something you shouldn't say like on social media, unless you really want to become the main character for 48 hours. And the closest I could come up with is this. Vince McMahon was right about Mustafa Ali. He was right about not pushing him. He was right about ultimately firing him. And I think the proof is in Mustafa's post WWE era, where this is fairly recent, so you don't have to dig too deeply back into your memory, but a lot of us were really excited when he was fired, when he was finally freed from the Fed, where everyone expected him to fly of his own volition and finally show us like how the WWE was keeping him down, and those training videos that he liked to post on his Twitter account to just sort of like passive aggressive little, hey, this is what I can do. And
yes, he was definitely playing the game and trying to get people hyped about this is what I'm going to be. Look at me. Did he do a breaking out of prison video?
Did he do a breaking out of prison video? I think so. Or if it wasn't a prison, it was like an institution of some kind, right? Or something like that. And he so like a lot of us were excited. I mean, everyone felt that there was a lot of untapped potential, that that Ali was not getting his the respect or the opportunities that were offered unto others. I think a lot of us also remembered his great SmackDown debut when he was finally dragged out of 205 Live. So far, I would argue that he has had one really good match, but he had one great match, I'd say, against Speedball Mike Bailey at a TNA show, and I can't remember the name of the pay-per-view. I can never remember TNA pay-per-view names for some reason.
That's okay.
And but everyone knows which one it is. It's the one where it was the one in Montreal, right? Yeah, that's it. It was the one in Montreal in Verdun, with the PCO stuff and all that. And he they were having legitimately a great match until they decided to flip it around and do Montreal Screwjob references, where then I just started to eat my hat.
Like classic TNA idea.
Exactly. Too. Getting in its own way, just like preventing this tremendous, because they were on par for a truly great match. And then this started to happen. And he's been working hard on the character work, doing the whole presidential candidate gimmick and with the Secret Service and all that, which I feel never really got over. Which so like it's as if he's trying to show the people that released them, yeah, look at everything you're missing out on. Look at this great character work I can use. Look at these competent matches I could be having with people from multiple weight classes. You don't have to pigeonhole me into anything. You can give me stuff to flex my sports entertainment muscle, when in fact we were all kind of excited to see him like tear it up. And it's not as if he was wrestling the dregs of the indie circuit. He was up there with some very top guys and worked New Japan, and it just has not been hitting. And I myself, as an admitted Mustafa Ali fan, I'm very, very, very disappointed. So ultimately, I'm like, people were scratching their head and was like, oh, of course, Vince is going to fire him because Vince doesn't understand anything. But maybe Vince was onto something on this one. Maybe Vince just saw that there was a very limited ceiling for this guy. And I think it took the rest of us to see it for ourselves to kind of come around on that as well.
Yeah, his post WWE career, I think, actually makes sense if you remember his pre WWE career. I mean, he was a guy who was around on the indies for a long time, was, I don't think, ever really thought of as being like a great indie wrestler. I mean, he was most well known for having the cool finish with the inverted 450 that he did, but he wasn't like someone that was a PWG regular or was considered like a top guy in Ring of Honor. He was a guy who could rotate and do some cool stuff in the ring, but was never really thought of the way, like, just to toss out some names like Johnny Gargano or Roderick Strong, or these guys who would like be considered like, the top wrestlers on the indie circuit. He gets signed by WWE and he's around for a while, but I feel like unless you wanted to make the argument that like he improved a lot when he was in WWE during that time period, which most people don't improve when they're in WWE, like he really like he's really hasn't been radically different. I feel like he's been basically the same wrestler that he was before he signed with WWE. Right. He's working higher profile like positions, like he's working those TNA shows. He's getting shots in New Japan and New Japan Strong events in the US. He's kind of being brought in as like a top indie guy for all these indie promotions. I saw that he just wrestled Adam Brooks down in Australia at the main event of one of their big shows for Melbourne City Wrestling. Like he's getting these, fly-in dates that he wasn't getting before, but he's basically the same wrestler.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. And, I think, like, to be completely honest, I wasn't extremely familiar with his indie work. So,
he wasn't like, I knew who he was because of his cool finishing move, and I had seen some of his work, but it was mostly like Chicago indie based. It was not like he was not working like all these Ring of Honor shows or PWG shows or Evolve shows, where like if you're not like a local Chicago indie watcher, you're really not seeing him that much.
Yeah, he wasn't working the super indies and getting out there. And I think maybe this is kind of like maybe maybe this is the wake up call ultimately that we're getting here. Now, I do want to add a little asterisk to this, where okay, so like his obviously his tenure on the indies is not over yet, and he's been pushing really, 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 really hard to work the Best of Super Juniors next year. I'm still willing and able and capable of giving him some rope, and maybe within the right environment, with the right motivation and the right type of people as well, sort of egging him on to bring out the best in him. Maybe maybe a little stint in the Best Super Juniors tournament next year will reveal something that we haven't seen so far, right? But and I'm always, and I'm saying this, but I'm always excited about a pro wrestler whom I'm a little down on, maybe not, down. Yeah, okay, yeah, that's it. I'm a little down on. I'm still open to them, proving my feelings wrong, or just suddenly having an epiphany and becoming like this tremendous pro wrestler, and that's all I can hope for in this case, where I'm like, oh, okay, like maybe 2025 is the year where Mustafa Ali just cracks the code and becomes a tippy top, undeniable guy. But as it stands right now, I'm in this weird position where I'm not excited for Mustafa Ali matches. I sort of shrug my shoulders. I'm like, yeah, all right, like I'm not gonna turn away. I'm not gonna turn away or say, oh, these matches are terrible. They're the worst. They're not bad matches by any stretch of the imagination, but I was expecting more, and I'm still expecting more. So, the matches happen now. I don't chase them down. I don't get excited for them. Maybe there's still something to crack. Maybe, look, I mean, working in TNA has its own little ceiling as well, right? It has its own little style, and he wants to work within those confines as well. But you'd think that once you're freed and you feel like you can do what you want, if this is what you choose to do, well, maybe are these choices or are these limitations? That makes sense.
And with his career, I mean, the sliding doors theory, he's allegedly tapped for the Kofi Kingston spot at WrestleMania back in like 2019, where he was supposedly going to become the world champion. He's going to beat Bryan Danielson at WrestleMania. He gets hurt and probably one of the worst times in anyone's career ever to get injured.
Yep.
And his career is so different than what it could have been. I don't know, like from a talent performance perspective, it would be all that different. But would he have had his career in WWE is obviously very different if he gets that push instead of getting injured and then being kind of relegated back down the card.
Let me counter with this. How different has Kofi Kingston's career been since winning the title?
Yeah, I mean, it's fair. I mean, I think where Kofi is now currently is not all that different than would he have been if he didn't win that title.
Right.
But
so that's the point. It's like
obviously there was a run for Kofi that I think probably solidified his legacy for WWE fans.
That's fair.
That people will remember,
and Ali would have probably avoided the terrible Antifa gimmick. It's like, all of the really worst stuff would have, we could imagine would have been avoided had that been had the original plans went through.
Yeah, like I don't know if they're
I'm not
just
surprised either, because Danielson was a huge proponent for Mustafa Ali. I'm actually surprised he didn't get an AEW tryout, to be completely honest. But at the same time, I think we dodged a bullet on that one.
Yeah, I don't know if AEW doesn't need Mustafa Ali, and even if you want to say like his run so far outside of WWE has been a disappointment, which I think most people would probably agree with you on, I still think he's made a lot of these indie dates. I think it's valuable to have a guy like out there that's on indies that's serving a better purpose than if he was just like the 45th most important wrestler in AEW.
Sure. Yeah, I agree.
All right. Thanks a lot, Warren. I appreciate you coming on the show again. I'll talk to you again later.
All right. Well, thank you very much, and happy. Oh no, never mind that.
All right. Our next guest on the show, our first-time guest, it is Sarah from the Trish and Sarah Wrestling Podcast. I have been thinking about having Sarah on the show for quite a long period of time. Me and Sarah actually know each other prior to Voice of Wrestling or any of the podcasting world. Do I have some what's my role in starting your podcast? Do I have any responsibility at all to gifting that to the world? Can I claim any of that?
I don't. You know what? I feel like you wouldn't be the first man to try to take responsibility.
Yeah. Can I do that? Yeah, I think
go right
I basically started it, right?
Yeah, well, us and the Leah from Tunnel Talk, who sort of said, you have to do a podcast and I'm going to produce it and we're going to start on this day. And it was like, oh, okay. I guess I'll put some things together in notes, and it took off. That's how it started. So
Yeah, and I'm it's no secret that I'm a fan of the podcast, and the perspective that you and Trish bring to wrestling is badly needed. Not only because you're women, but like also because you're women. Like it would be a great podcast if you guys were two guys, but the fact that you're women, that perspective is like unbelievably needed perspective in wrestling.
oh, thank you. We like numbers, but we also like stories, which I think is kind of unique a little bit sometimes. So we have a good time. We just
It's
tend to talk about-
sadly becoming like unnecessarily nuanced. Like you're
I
either
know.
like everything is business analysis or everything is vibes analysis, and there's
I
kind of nowhere in
know.
between.
I like it. I like a duo of that because I feel like you can't get to. Sometimes you need business to back up your vibes takes, right?
And because this is the Gentleman's Wrestling Podcast, and we're supposed to be we're serious on here, like we definitely lean more towards business than vibes, because vibes is often nonsense. But I feel like, especially with the way like we talk about business trends, and now we have so much information, mainly because of the great work that people like WrestleTix and Brandon at
Yep.
WrestleNomics are doing. We have so much more info on that kind of stuff than we did when it was basically like whatever Dave has in the Observer, we just kind of got to go with.
Yeah.
Like that is like become such a much more dominating topic, and it's frankly become annoying in the sense of like something can be good, but if it didn't do good business wise, then maybe it wasn't good. And wrestling is supposed to be fun. It's a hobby that's fun, and if it's not fun, we should be moving on and doing something else with our lives.
Well, that's just it. And like, that's one of the things I try really hard to do. And is even though like we do talk about business a lot, but like at the end of the day, I don't really think about the business stuff until after I think about whether I liked it, right? I've liked stuff that have drawn horribly, and I've disliked stuff that's drawn really well. But like ultimately, you can't let that stuff impact how you feel about something. And that's the goal of wrestling, is right to make you feel right. And
yeah, sometimes I think about going back in time, like especially if you go back to previous generations of wrestling. Like I'm a really big fan of like, you know, peak Gabe era Ring of Honor. And I'd be like, oh man, this stuff was so great. But I'm like, if this happened today, people would be like, man, it only drew 650 fans. Like, you know, like it doesn't really mean anything. And I'd be like, oh, this like wrestling match, this Nigel McGuinness match changed my life. What do you mean it doesn't mean anything? It just, and certainly if you go back to like people like idolize, like, you know, like 1992, 1993 WCW. I'm like, yeah, don't look into the business metrics of what that company was doing, even if, you know, the matches were cool. Anyway,
no, I was gonna say I think it can be helpful in terms of like trying to understand why certain things are happening sometimes. That's what I like. But I do feel badly because I do know how many bad faith actors use business metrics, and it kind of makes me sad.
So Sarah, what's your take that you have for us today?
All right, here's my take. This is a crazy take, but my take is that, and I'm going to use the Young Bucks as an example. The Young Bucks, much of the hate for the Young Bucks, maybe not all of it, but a percentage of the hate for the Young Bucks is actually misogyny. Which doesn't make a lot of sense because Young Bucks are not women, Jesse. They're not. So I don't know how misogyny could apply to them. But I think some of this falls under the blanket of, you know, one of the things that I think the elite have done, and there's other independent wrestlers and other folks from that sort of era and generation have kind of played with, is ideas of masculinity and gender identity to some degree, and like not being this kind of stereotypical tough guy wrestler, right? And I think that it's threatening to people sometimes to have guys who don't, you know, they want to tell more stories about friendship, right, than they do about like, we're fighting for this belt. And I think sometimes that gets people a little bit heated up, and they're not quite comfortable with it, and they don't know why they're comfortable with it, and it you know, kind of causes some confusion there. So anyway, that's my take.
I think it's pretty clear if you look at like the Cornettisms and like that criticism is coming from, but whether it's the Young Bucks or Kenny, that a huge element of that criticism is coming from like misogyny / homophobia, in the sense that like these guys are not masculine enough for me to take them seriously as pro wrestlers.
Right.
And that is annoying or threatening to me. I guess there's a balance between like, you can be like, I don't really like wrestlers that are like that without necessarily being misogynistic, but there definitely is an element of like, these people threaten what, in the fact that they're popular and successful, threaten what I view as like what the idealized professional wrestler is going to be. And it just in that just that thought process in general, like I have an idealized version of professional wrestling, it needs to look like this, is a
Yes.
very toxic mentality in terms of
Yes.
evaluating any product, because wrestling is built on just a variety of talents, a variety of different personalities, not sameness. And
Well,
so if you're viewing it through that lens of like everything basically needs to conflict to like a pretty narrow view of how I view professional wrestling,
I
it's
think the
not going to
best
become successful.
there's the best parts of professional wrestling, and I think some of the best matches and match-ups in professional wrestling is when you take two radically different wrestlers with different backgrounds and styles and characters and put those two people together and you can make magic. I think Full Gear was last night. Orange Cassidy and Jon Moxley is a perfect example of that, right? Would you have said 5 years ago, oh, geez, Orange Cassidy is going to be one of Jon Moxley's best feuds or opponents? Fuck no.
Yeah.
But he is.
What has happened to Orange Cassidy is legitimately amazing. Like how successful he has been. That's why I've always said, like, again, not to get back to Cornette, like anyone that talks about the AEW product and the problems with the AEW product, and they bring up Orange Cassidy or they bring up Darby Allin,
Yeah.
but
Fuck 'em.
these are two good examples. I'm like, if your problems with AEW are about Orange Cassidy, who has been basically the most consistent performer in the entire company throughout its entire existence, it's like Orange, Darby, and Mox, I think, would be like the three guys who have been there haven't missed like a ton of extended time.
Not because of injuries. They've been, significantly healthy. They've been lucky in that way. Yep.
And basically all their performances are high level, consistent, especially in terms of like having big matches. It's like you cannot legitimately criticize the company. Like there's plenty of other points you can point to that have weight, even if I don't necessarily agree with them. But like the idea of it's like Orange Cassidy is going to ruin AEW is nonsense. But again, almost that comes from like that.
It ties into the same thing, right? Which is what your perception of what a professional wrestler should be, or people's perception of what a professional wrestler should be.
And a lot of it, in Orange's case, it's totally outdated. It's people talking about him like he's still doing his, 2018 Evolve gimmick where he like never does any real offense.
Right.
Like it's just constantly doing the comedy spots. Like, and like, that's not like he's like basically like a really high level undersized babyface character at this point. Like
he's fantastic at selling. Like that's something that he and Darby Allin both have in common is they're really good sellers.
And they're also really light, so they can get chucked around. And Darby's willing to get chucked around a lot.
They're both very good at combining their offense with their size, right? Which I think you can point to Adam Cole. That's his biggest problem right now, right? So I think, and and again, that's not a body shaming perspective. It's more like, hey,
Wow, Sarah, can't believe it.
Hot takes right here. So like, I think that's, I know, right? I'm launching from one hot take to another. I just think that's one of those things where, I think Orange Cassidy, I think he's one of the best wrestlers in the world. Like I probably have justified reasons for all of that. And I think the part of it is because his character is so consistent and his character is not stagnant. It grows, right? It's grown throughout his time in AEW, and you can see that progression, even if his storylines and his booking have been different. His character has changed as he has changed, which I think is a significant underrated in terms of wrestlers' popularity that I think a lot of people, FTR, should really look into. But I think that it also ties into that perspective of like, why do I like this person and why do they appeal to me? And, they're doing something that no one else is doing, right? Which ties back to the Young Bucks and some of their storytelling and how the Elite do stuff. It's Orange Cassidy and Darby Allin don't look like or wrestle like anybody else you'd seen recently, right? Especially not on television. And that's why they've been as successful as they have been. And that combination of like weird matchups, right? Like, Moxley against another brawler is fine, right? But Moxley against Orange Cassidy or Darby Allin is genius because it's going to beat the shit out of them and they're going to have these amazing comebacks and you're going to do these fantastic kickouts and it's just, you're totally going to be into it. And then they lose. But still, it's amazing.
Yeah. And to get back to your point about like the Young Bucks and misogyny, like this isn't really new. You can go back to like Shawn Michaels and like there were a lot of serious wrestling fans that did not like Shawn Michaels because his character was that of like he was a twink, like that's what he was. Like his character was like in hindsight like pretty homoerotic, like and that was like and now it's kind of like you go back and you're like, oh man, these people sound like they're dinosaurs talking about Shawn Michaels not being good, because Shawn Michaels is regarded by pretty much most people as being like, a legendary, incredible pro wrestler, especially when you're just talking about his performances in the ring.
Right.
But so this is not like a new phenomenon in sense of like people, especially if a guy's undersized.
Yep.
And especially if a guy is, I don't know, if it's dancing, like other aspects of it that are like not, they don't necessarily look like Stan Hansen. Like I love Stan Hansen. I would sign me up for more wrestlers that are like Stan Hansen, but not every wrestler has to be Stan Hansen. That would actually make Stan Hansen less cool.
Right. If everybody's doing the same thing, then it's not interesting. And getting that kind of like, oh, what are these guys going to do together when they start, when they start in the ring, like boring, right? Like, you want to see a brawler knock a flyer out of the sky, right?
Yeah.
That's fun. So, yeah, that's my hot take, Jesse.
All right. Thanks a lot, Sarah. Appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Next guest in our lineup here. He is a first-time guest on the show, although not due to lack of trying. But he is the host of the Emerald Flow Show. He's a contributor to voicesofwrestling.com. And he, of course, is a member of Team Canada here on the voicesofwrestling.com. It is Gerard Drolo. Gerard, how's it going?
It's going great, Jesse. Thank you so much for having me on. And I'm actually really excited to talk.
Yeah, no, I wanted to have you on the show. I just here's the issue with me is that I just feel like I'm insecure with my Noah and All Japan knowledge, and I'm afraid to talk about something I don't really know that much about, which maybe will come as a surprise to some of my listeners. Ha ha ha! But it's true.
Well, I think that takes a certain level of respect for your audience, not to necessarily go into those areas where you are uncomfortable.
Yeah, I've been pitched by people who are big Joshi fans, like, oh, you should do an episode on Joshi, like you should have this person on, and just personally, I don't watch really any Joshi. I there's been years where I've watched more of it than I have this year, which is pretty minimal. It's mostly just limited to a handful of matches people have recommended to me, and people are like, oh, I listened to that episode if you had a talk to Joshi, and I'm like, yeah, I just don't know anything about it. So it would just be me asking a lot of questions. I just don't feel like I have a lot to add to a conversation like that. And there are several outlets that are going to do a much better job than that than me. So I just don't feel really comfortable doing that. Even though I know some people would really get a kick out of it. So it's about finding that balance.
Well, and you don't have to worry about pissing someone off, because you will if you do the Joshi episode.
Well, to be perfectly fair, I'm going to piss people off anyway, so I don't know how much of that is a topic issue as much as it is a meat issue. But Gerard, I've asked you for a hot take. I'm sure you spent hours and hours agonizing over what you're going to say, but why don't you deliver it to us?
Okay, so my hot take, and I'm taking advantage of you inviting me on your wonderful show to actually talk about something related to Japanese wrestling. I don't get to talk about a lot on my show because we only cover All Japan and Noah. But my hot take is Geto's got to go.
He's got to go. So
yeah, he's got to be replaced as the booker of New Japan Pro Wrestling.
Mm-hmm. So I love it. I love the take. I definitely feel like a lot of New Japan conversation kind of beats around the bush when it comes to Geto with, we need Geto to improve. We're kind of sick of some of his booking patterns. But rarely is the subject, I think, broached where we just say flat out, it's time for someone else to be making the key creative decisions. What makes you kind of want to jump that far with the product?
I think it's perfectly reasonable. And I'm going to start by saying, actually, that I disagree with many analysis of New Japan in saying that, okay, Okada and Ospreay left. They have a thin roster. I disagree. I don't think yes, they've lost some major stars, but I do not think it's some paper thin roster. I think it's more about how that roster is utilized, and that falls on Geto. And look, if you want to take the long view of history, we all know that bookers have their lifespan and have been replaced. I think even within the history of New Japan and Japanese wrestling more generally, that is the case. Riki Choshu starts as booker in New Japan, I think in the late 80s, early 90s, famously goes with 0 points in the first ever G1 climax in 1991, puts all of the young talent over. By the time we get to when I start watching Japanese wrestling in 1999, I'm reading things. People are getting sick of Choshu. He's pushing Kensuke Sasaki too much. He doesn't have any respect for the junior heavyweights, and things are starting to slip in like 99, 2000, even before like Inokiism takes hold. Now Choshu's out and he comes back later, and I want to say 06, 07. He just books a meat and potatoes product, and he is a bridge that helps to stabilize that company after several tumultuous years, right? So it's not even a case that Gedo can never return, but I think he has to go away for a while at the very least.
He's been in charge of a major wrestling company for an extremely long period of time based on really historical comparisons. Like you could point to Vince McMahon, you could point to Giant Baba, certainly, as guys who were there for decades and decades. But really, when we look at like peak booking eras of pro wrestling, we're talking about, like a few 2-3 years at the most often is often the case. Like in Baba, who, everyone remembers Baba now as this incredible booker, and in a lot of ways he was, but there were certainly tons of ups and downs over his long tenure as a booker.
Well, Jesse, I'm glad you brought Baba up, because I also wrote this down in my notes because I know the story. In the early 80s, NTV basically told Baba, you got to step aside for a bit. You got to push Jumbo and Tenru. This is around like 80, 81. NTV plays a major role in getting Stan Hansen to jump from New Japan. So they took the reins, and the All Japan booker becomes Akio Sato, who probably to American fans might remember in the Orient Express. A member of the Orient Express in the late 80s in WWF. But here's just like this mid-card wrestler that then has a hand in booking, right? And Gedo, to an extent, was just a mid-card wrestler that became a booker. We could talk about possible choices, and I don't have any like strong feelings one way or another, but I'm just saying, like, even in like someone like the legendary Giant Baba, who very few in the business would ever like challenge, like NTV came in and said, no, you have to change direction of your company, and he did, and then they went on to have another boom in the 80s after that.
Yeah, and so in regards to the current situation, I have a hard time disagreeing with what you're saying. Like a lot of it is just like depends on who's going to take over and what that person's vision is going to be like, and we don't really know that, so it feels safer to just be like Gedo, warts and all, is probably better than the just grab bag average guy who's going to take over, because especially if you look at the state of some of the other promotions in Japan over the last like 5 or 6 years, it's not always amazing creative when other people have been given the book. Now, with that being said, I think like a major thing with Gedo, and I'm glad you brought up like the Osprey and Okada departures and how that's brought up. And look, that's obviously a factor. And they've had a talent drain. They've had, guys kind of fall off a cliff physically that have hurt it. But when it comes to booking, like every booker has challenges. Like you can't just be, leaning on those challenges as excuses. It's part of being a booker is overcoming those challenges. And if you're not up to rising to that, then someone else has to have that job. I think with New Japan, there have been some frustrating tendencies with Gedo. I think one of them obviously being his reliance on interference, outside heat, that kind of thing. And that has always been a tenement of his booking, really, since he took over. And really since, especially since, Bullet Club became an established thing in the company, which is now running on over 10 years, I believe.
Yep, 11 years.
Yeah. And so you have this twofold where you have these repetitive booking practices, like the constant interference that I'm so sick of seeing. I find it completely uncreative. It's not interesting. It's not exciting. It hasn't been in a very long time. Plus with the fact that you don't have those outstanding individual talents that were super over to kind of cover up some of the weaknesses that come from some of the warts with his booking. And so now we're left with the staleness the tiresome problems with his booking practices, as well as not having just that absolutely insane level of talent to get over to that next to kind of get fans over some of those lapses, because everyone will forgive
Yeah.
bad booking if there's amazing stuff happening.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you think about, okay, what were some of Ghetto's missteps? The Okada return, early AJ Styles, even early Switchblade Jay White, but it was like the talent of all of those guys that actually made the initial misfire surmountable,
Mhm.
right? Lesser talent than those guys would not have been able to do what they did.
Yeah, I mean, we also, one of the lessons we've learned from wrestling, especially if you follow WWE at all, is that like when you're hot, right? So you can
Yeah.
make, like mistakes, and if you have other stuff that's such a strong positive, that no one will remember those mistakes. But you lose some of those positives, which in this case would be like losing Okada, losing Kenny Omega, losing AJ Styles, losing Shinsuke Nakamura, the talent train. Then suddenly those issues become more magnified. And it's interesting that your point was really specific on, like, it's not like the talent, you believe the talent on the roster is there, but the booking hasn't been able to get there. And you could say that they've done a disservice to some of the prospective younger talents um, by some of Gato's booking mistakes. Like, what are some of the mistakes you think he's made that have made people think that the roster is not as good as it really is?
I think Red Narita would be a prime example. I think he would have been better off just doing his Shibata tribute gimmick and growing into that than what they did with the forced dastardly heel gimmick in House of Torture. No question about that. And even to a certain extent, Shota Umino, I'm very wary of completely writing him off, but I also look at sort of what Tetsuya Naito was when he was having problems turning in, becoming that main eventer and sort of climbing that mountain. And I look at Shota Umino and like, you're not what Tetsuya Naito was in 2013 even. Like, so, that sort of is an alarm bell. Although again, like I said, I'm worried to sort of completely write him off. Those are, to me, stick out as the two biggest things. To a certain extent, David Finlay, I think sometimes David Finlay does get, some people are too hard on him, but I think maybe there should have been maybe some sort of transition era instead of completely just quickly making him into the top four and heel.
Mm-hmm. I agree with, specifically with Ren Narita, to use as an example. It seems like his solution is constantly, like, if something's not working, is like, let's just make them a shitty cheating heel then.
Yeah.
And the last thing, like when they I don't think the Son of Strong Style and the Shibata cosplay was working for Narita. I think that was a bad idea for starters. So that's also a mark against Gato, that was an attempted idea. And then but he had to, maybe he has to pivot from that because it's not working. And the solution is just like, well, let's make him a shitty cheating heel. Like, that's the last thing New Japan needed, was just another guy at House of Torture, another guy who's going to, every time he has a match, you can kind of just be like, I guess I can kind of write this match off because it's going to be, nothing until some guy runs in and ref bumps, and the same shit we've been seeing for years and years now. That can't be the solution to everything. And that speaks of a booker who's run out of ideas, right?
Mm-hmm. Right? So Jake Lee gets injured. What does he do? He just turns Sonata and puts him into the heel mold.
Well, Sonata's got Sonata's kind of fizzled out as the five guys. What are we gonna do? Another cheating heel. And it's like half the roster is playing this role for the most part. And it's a real issue.
Yeah, I think it's just, and it's just, I mean, it's almost inevitable. You just falling back on these crutches, and it's just, it happens to many bookers, right? Even just give him just any kind of break. It's not even to recharge, I think would go a long way.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks a lot, Gerard. I appreciate you having on the show. We'll have to have you on for a longer podcast sometime, but I appreciate you taking the time, and I'm sure all my listeners appreciate hearing from you as well.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Jesse. It was good to talk about this and get it off my chest.
Our next guest, he comes to us all the way from the Emerald Isle. He is the host of the Pro Wrestling Paradise Show at Pro Wrestling Torch. It is Alan 4L. Alan, welcome back to the show.
Hi, Jesse. I have nothing to congratulate you on. I am very excited to be here, and I am armed with the hottest of sizzling takes to talk to you about here today.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to put on like some oven mitts, put on like some sunscreen just to avoid any type of burn that I'm gonna get from this hot take. Let us have it.
Okay, so my hot take is that, get ready for this, David Finlay is a better worker than Tully Blanchard ever was. Oh no, wait, damn it, that was Dave Meltzer's hot take. He stole it on me. Damn, I can't use that. Also, it's completely ludicrous. And Dave, what are you on? My actual hot take is, and as I was saying to Jesse before we started, I when Jesse kind of approached me with this concept, I was like, I'm sure I'll be able to come up with something really good. And I was like, as I went over the weekend, I was like just waiting for something to come to me that was like this brilliant hot take. And I was kind of looking for like a positive one, because a lot of hot takes are generally, I don't know if this has been borne out in the show so far, but a lot of the hot takes might be a critical hot take or something a little bit negative. So I was kind of I was wanting to come up with something positive. Like I was thinking of like maybe like certain wrestlers that maybe are that I think are somewhat unheralded that I like a lot more. And I was like, that's kind of like, yeah, it's a bit vanilla. And so I'm here with a negative hot take about modern wrestling, which is pretty much like 99% of hot takes. So yeah, Jesse, my hot take is I watch a lot of wrestling, and when I watch American TV wrestling in particular, and generally American TV wrestling for me means AEW, but you see this kind of in other places too, and in the US Indies and in European wrestling, and I'm I'm leaving aside Japan and Mexico because I think it's going to feed into this point that I really worry about the future of in-ring wrestling, because so often it is like a thought that um and a lot of people are big proponents on this, the aforementioned Dave Meltzer, that wrestling evolves and wrestling is better now. Like in-ring wrestling is better now than it's ever been. Like I feel like when Dave is saying something like this he's thinking about, like, for instance, a Will Ospreay versus Pac match, or Shingo versus whoever. And like, yes, high level, like the best matches I can see where that mindset comes from, that like these best matches of 2024, and if you view wrestling a certain way, that they are better than the best matches have ever been previously. But I think if you take everything as a whole, I really think in-ring wrestling is in a bad way, and it's a big factor of this, and the central kernel of my take is that I think a lot of we're seeing with American promotions, a the the amount of reps wrestlers are getting is going down a lot. House shows, AEW have never really embraced house shows. They tried for a little bit and didn't catch on. Um, WWE have scaled back their house shows a ton, and we are seeing guys in AEW um, who have been around now for 5, 6 years, and in some cases the lack of improvement, and in other cases the outright, I would say, deterioration of their work is really evident to me. And it's not the most maybe obvious stuff to viewers, but it's the snap, the pace that you see in the ring. It's like, it's really, a lot of times I watch matches on Dynamite or whatever, and it's like, it's very herky jerky, and guys are, it's like, seem like they're wrestling underwater, and just things don't seem smooth. And it's like, if you go back and watch like a TV match from any previous era of pro wrestling, and there's just, the average TV match just has more snap, more fluidity, it's just a better quality in terms of kind of that
Alan,
aspect of things.
is there somebody who you think has been like people in AEW who you feel like his work has regressed, who should be improving?
Yeah, like a couple of guys who so there's very obvious examples of kind of like younger guys who kind of started up around this, like for example, like a Max Caster or a Private Party or people like this who I don't think we've seen huge improvements that you'd expect of guys who are um, thought of as prospects 5 years ago. But where it's really evident to me is kind of more sort of veteran guys like uh, an example who I don't really want to pick on this guy, but like when I watch Kyle O'Reilly now, I like Kyle O'Reilly just seems like someone who's regressed in terms of his in ring. It's just like an Adam Cole as well, and it's guys who just
Both
they're
of those guys had
veterans and
pretty serious injuries.
true. That's absolutely true. But I just think it isn't a it's an across the board thing I see when I watch wrestling now. I just think there's a lot less snap, there's a lot less fluidity, and it's it strikes me as something where people aren't getting as much time in the ring, and the way that Jesse, I'm struggling with this. I
Well,
am
I've said this
I'm
before. I've said this before that
I'm not getting across the point I'm trying to make well, I
yeah.
don't think.
I've
Sorry.
said this. I've said this before that like I think American television wrestling, just the system, is not good for developing talents. Like other systems are way better, particularly the Japanese system or the Mexican system, where you're just working
Yeah,
a lot because you're not working a
that's the
lot
thing.
and you're not getting a lot of time if all you're doing is television wrestling.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And that's why I said I kind of wanted to keep Japan and Mexico out of, because I think we're seeing like a Hanare in New Japan. Like I think that guy's like on a constant upward trend in terms of improving bit by bit, constantly all the time. Um, and plenty of guys in Mexico you could point to. Atlantis Jr. is an example, and I just I don't see that with as many guys in in the US, and I think it's really going to hamper AEW going forward. There's certain special talents that will rise above that, like your Kyle Fletcher is a good example, but even with Kyle, was he got so much of that kind of early improvement from working a lot in New Japan, and um, since he's come to AEW, he's been someone who's probably gotten more in ring time than most. When you think of the fact that he gets showcase AEW matches and also ROH stuff he had for quite a while, and they keep a focus on him, and also a lot of like his improvement has been on the more kind of presentation side of things. Um, his in ring was already at a very high level. So like, yeah, I think there's a lack of spark in the work, and just again I come back to things like pace and fluidity, and I don't know, it seems like a lot of times I watch guys and it's like you just it it feels like they haven't they're rusty. There's like a sense of rust in people that like you wouldn't see when, and like I don't think it was a healthy and it wasn't a healthy thing for the wrestlers when they were working 250 times a year. Um, but it was a healthy thing for the quality of the wrestling, I think. So yeah, it's and even like going back to like, you know, eras where like we weren't getting as many great matches or whatever. Um, like in 1999 WF, like if you watch 1999 WF, like people would generally think of like, you know, very poor work, not a lot of great matches. And I think the reason for that was generally, or a big reason for that is that there wasn't the focus on the match. Match didn't get a lot of time. But like if you watch guys like I watched a TNA match, Test and Albert, like just a squash match against these two guys from like an episode of Metal or something. I just randomly watched on YouTube a couple of months ago, and it was like 3 minutes, so it was nothing to write home about. But during that 3 minutes, there was like such an aggressiveness, a snap, everything was just there was no second guessing of anything, and it just came off much better in that sense than, some of these like longer matches that you'll see on an episode of Dynamite or Collision that can be plodding and just kind of, yeah, just not really have that spark.
All right. Well, you heard it here, folks. Alan Cunahan, who said that he did not have any hot takes, then ends up saying that a Tess and Albert match from an episode of WWF Metal is better than anything on Dynamite and Collision. Thanks a lot, Alan, for joining the show.
Oh yeah, I don't think I was able to convey my what I'm kind of thinking in my head as well as I wanted here, but yeah, I'm not
Yeah.
a hot take
Well,
person.
I've
I'm not
talked about
designed for these.
I've talked about this in relation to the WWE ID program, and like kind of like they're going to be looking at indie talent more, I guess, through it. And like the way the wrestling atmosphere was set up in the 2010s with the proliferation of indie wrestling and just how guys were able to travel around all over the world and wrestle a bunch of different opponents and work so frequently in different environments, that was a good way to develop talent. We've seen a lot of fantastic wrestlers develop through that system. With the indies the way they are now, both in the United States and in Europe, it is much more challenging, I think, for like a wrestler to become good, especially because if they show any type of promise, they're going to get signed by somebody pretty quickly.
It's not,
So
it's,
they're not even
and
going to
obviously
get that development period.
this is a part of becoming good, but another way I put it is it's hard for a wrestler to become comfortable. You're gonna be like when you are wrestling to the frequency, when you're wrestling at the frequency of guys would have in the past, you're gonna become way more comfortable and just than if you're just constantly kind of having to reset yourself because you haven't wrestled in like 3 weeks or whatever it might be.
Well, and also think about like whether you're talking about like the old WWF house show schedule or even like the way Japan and Mexico work now, where they do, you work a bunch of multi-man tags, you're in the ring against the same opponent. Like if you're doing a short TV feud on like Raw in like 2005, that means on the house shows, you're generally working with that opponent like for match after match after match after match. And then eventually you have a TV match or maybe a pay-per-view match and you've already wrestled this person 30 plus times. In Japan or Mexico, it's a little bit different, but it's the same kind of thing where you're wrestling in the ring against this person over and over and over again. You transpose that today, especially a promotion like AEW, like say Kyle Fletcher is going to wrestle Kyle O'Reilly, like they're just going to have a one-off match on Dynamite. They might have never wrestled a singles match against each other before and maybe never wrestle one again. So we're talking about like one match and what's the chemistry like? What's the comfortability like? Compared to in the old days when you'd have like 30 plus matches with this opponent at least.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, it's I don't know. I'd like to see. I'd really like. I think AEW, one of their big mistakes they've made is not embracing sending their young talent out to get experience in another system. Like Anna Jay going to Stardom. Like why aren't they doing so much more of that? Why
We
hasn't
all
Hook?
thought that was going to happen, like from the get go, right? They had these
Because they have
partnerships,
all
with
these
different deals.
relationships.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's one of the biggest advantages to having those relationships is the ability to do that. And like, why in God's name has Hook not done like 8 Japanese tours at this point? Like, for different promotions, like he should have done. They should have set him up to do a Dragon Gate tour. They should have set him up to do an All Japan tour. New Japan, CMLL. Just have this guy go. But like, honestly, like Hook is. No, I don't think Hook is any more developed as an in-ring bell-to-bell pro wrestler than he was when I saw his debut match.
yeah. It's
Like,
probably pretty. I think he is, but it's very minimal. Like,
yeah,
and the other thing is like, yeah, I mean, like in my fantasy book land where like you could just there's got to be a reason why they haven't done this, but like why like every one of their tag teams like should just go and do some Dragon Gate tours and just work
yeah,
like Top Flight should have wrestled like 6 months in Dragon Gate by now.
yeah,
Maybe that's
absolutely. Like,
I don't know. Maybe that's something Dragon Gate doesn't want to do, or but I
well,
get the
Dragon
impression that's
Gate
what
would
they're doing.
happily do it if
Yeah,
AEW would fund it. Like,
yeah.
the only issue with Dragon Gate would be cost. Like, and that's the thing. That's AEW have such a just no funding issue that
But and you
they can
have
totally.
like the Young Bucks first people to tell you, like, yeah, working in Dragon Gate really helped us develop. Like,
Yep.
why isn't that connection there? And obviously, like, we've seen a little bit of Sammy Guevara went over and did a Best of the Super Juniors tour.
Wheeler Yuta.
Oh, that was Wheeler, yeah. They did. They sent someone to who was in the tag league last year.
Oh yeah, Gates of Agony.
Gates. No, it wasn't. I don't think it was Gates.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it was
It
Gates
was.
of Agony. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it was like, so they've done a little bit of that kind of stuff, but you would want it to be more, especially with these younger prospective wrestlers that you're not really even going to do a lot with. Like Nick Wayne can go work in Japan. That'd probably be good. And I bet you, and a lot of the talent, I imagine, would be enthusiastic about this, especially if they're being paid by AEW still.
Yeah, I mean, if they have designs to becoming better, surely they would think. And like, I mean, you get into pro wrestling because you enjoy, or at least most of these wrestlers, like they get in because they enjoy doing it, like they want to do it, and sitting on the sidelines and going to TV and not being used, or not going to TV and sitting at home. Like, I'd like to be paid to sit at home. I'd love that, Jesse. I'd come on here and do a gentleman's wrestling podcast with you every day if I was paid to sit at home. It would be great. But yeah, I don't think pro wrestlers are wired that way. I think they want to be out in front of a crowd. They want to be performing, getting those pops, and and as well, like, it's just in the case of going to Japan or Mexico, if you haven't traveled much previously, like, it's going to be a cool life experience. So
Yeah, and
yeah,
and I'll
I
say
can't imagine.
we have seen, especially this year, more guys going to CMLL. Now, granted, in a lot of cases, it's people like Chris Jericho and Bryan Danielson who don't need the experience necessarily, but we have seen, I think, a little bit more of that. And that, from a logistical standpoint, isn't that hard, because you could send someone to CMLL and still have them on TV every week on Dynamite if you wanted to.
Yeah, and it's it's so it's such a central thing to the Japanese system, is sending people around the world, and it has.
I will say that, like, for some of the women, like Willow Nightingale, I think have really benefited from, working the New Japan Strong shows, working for CMLL. Like, I do think that there, on the women's side, there's a little bit more activity, and I think you're seeing a little bit more better results from like talent sharing and exposure and things like that. It hasn't really trickled through to the men too much, but I do think that there are some signs of improvement and benefit that we've seen.
Yep, for sure. But yeah, I hope it's something that they take stock
Alan
of in
thinks wrestling
2025.
is gonna suck forever and ever. Thanks, Alan. Thanks
Yeah,
for coming on the show.
I have a lot of worries about the direction wrestling's going in a lot of ways. What's influencing wrestling, and yeah, it's
Too many Will
I don't know.
Ospreay clones.
That's it's
My
I
hot
don't know
take
if
is
that's
my hot
necessarily
take. My hot take is not enough. I'll happily take more Will Ospreays, by the way.
Yeah, they kind of have to be good though, because like if you're like a shit version of Will Ospreay, it's just you're a shit
Yeah.
version of
Well,
Will Ospreay.
you see like those NXT clips of like the people doing like the Ospreay Ricochet spots, but they're doing them in like 1/4 speed. That stuff's rough.
Yeah, I know it's like I spoke about this on my latest show, which might be up by the time people
It
are
probably
listening
will
to
be.
this. But yeah, it's there is trying to replicate like the best guy out there right now, and trying to become a like even if you do it really well, you're still going to be like a pale imitation of him. Why not like find some obscure, interesting guy from the past, and like mirror that guy's stuff that nobody else is doing? Like, that's I don't know. I think that's
I
a
make it
more.
akin to, like, if you watch like any like lower level basketball game, there's kids or poorer players out there that try to play like Steph Curry, but like Steph Curry is the best in the world at this one thing, and people doing a pale imitation of him is not compelling or interesting or particularly good for basketball. And I feel like that's in some cases, like, it's great, like Will Ospreay and Ricochet. The Will Ospreay and Ricochet spots are great when Will Ospreay and Ricochet are doing them with people that aren't quite the athletes of those guys, and most people are not. It comes across as very awkward. But We're going to wrap things up. Alan, I want to thank you for coming on the show. I want to thank you for being a consistent supporter of the podcast throughout all the time we've recorded. I've always appreciated your feedback that you've given. So I just want to
Well,
say
thank you,
thanks.
Jesse. It's my pleasure. I've really enjoyed listening to the podcast. Every time a new gentleman's appears on my feed, I always have that little endorphin burst where it's like, "Ooh, a new gentleman's wrestling podcast," and it'll perk up any day for me. So yeah, it's always nice to see, and keep up the good work. And I'll try to come on again when I'm not pressured into coming up with a hot take and absolutely bottling it like I did today. So we'll flesh out another topic in the future that I can do a better job on for you.
Nah, no worries, Alan. Thanks a lot.
All right, thanks, buddy.
Okay, our guest here at this time is a frequent guest of the show. He's returning once again. He's the host of the Open the Voice Gate podcast right here on the Voice of Wrestling Network. He is the preeminent Dragon Gate analyst, critic, advisor. I don't know how you want to describe yourself, Case, but it's Case Lowe. Case, welcome back to the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I think advisor would make it seem like they listen to me, and unfortunately they don't listen to me. But analyst, critic, when they rolled out English commentary 5 years ago, spotter for the English commentary team, they no longer need my help for that. But yeah, anything in that realm I think counts.
Yeah, but I'll be honest. I do think that, like your reputation as like the Dragon Gate guy, actually sometimes does you a disservice because you watch a lot of different wrestling and you've got a wide knowledge base. It's not solely related to Dragon Gate, but just because you fill that niche so well, I feel like sometimes not that it gives you not necessarily does a disservice, but I think you don't get necessarily the credit you get for just the overall wrestling you watch and think about besides outside of the Dragon Gate spectrum.
I not to pat myself on the back, but I would completely agree with you. Rich Kraetsch of Voices of Wrestling once described me as, quote, a sneaky territory guy, which I felt was incredibly accurate. I'm trying in 2025 especially to have more of a voice on CMLL as long as they stay relevant and they stay hot. I really enjoy that promotion. And I was kind of waiting on people this year to kind of do a little bit, Cubs is in his own universe and Cubs does so much, but I was kind of waiting for somebody to do a lot of written reviews and articles and thoughts in the same way they do for Dragon Gate on CMLL. And I don't necessarily know if that happened. So I would look to add that to my mantle in 2025.
Yeah, and that's a heavy lift because it's not like there's one CMLL show every few months that you got to cover.
No, because like right now I'm really into the Tuesday shows. As we're recording this, I'm legitimately extremely excited for the Tuesday Arena Mexico show tonight. A lot of people just pay attention to Friday shows. Nothing wrong with that. There's been some interesting Coliseo stuff this year. It all ebbs and flows. Normally when there's a bad Friday show, it means there's a good Saturday or a good Tuesday show in that same week.
Yeah, I find I'm like for CMLL, I'm trying to watch more of it. I'm definitely not in a position where I should be speaking or giving any form of critical analysis. But I do find it's not that, despite the volume of shows, I don't find it to be like super intimidating to try to watch because of the consistency of the characters and the angles. There isn't a ton of like, and I mean this in a good way, like not a ton of like variety or diversity in what they're doing. So it's really easy to drop in on stuff.
I agree. I think it's a super easy promotion to play catch up on. I can knock out a month's worth of CMLL stuff in a day if I put my mind to it, because I'm going to skip an openers match, probably skip a minis match. If the women's match isn't interesting, we skip that. All right, now we're at match 4 of 6. And then it's a matter of, do I want to watch Flip Gordon today? Do I not want to watch Flip Gordon today? It's all very easy to cut through.
Mm-hmm. So, Case, given your extensive background in wrestling, I'm sure you have a scintillating hot take for us. You want to share it?
Well, yeah, I appreciated the invite because I was racking my brain for what I could come up with, and then I watched AEW Full Gear this past Saturday, and I watched the Daniel Garcia Jack Perry match, and I watched Daniel Garcia do a spot where the title belt was in the ring, and he did the will I or will I not hit him with the belt. I'm so conflicted, and I guess this is a tale of two different takes. Where one, I think the Shawn Michaels "I'm sorry, I love you" super kick on Ric Flair might be the single most damaging spot in the history of professional wrestling. And that has led to take number 2, which is that we are filled with an industry right now full of awful baby faces, and perhaps the thing stunting the growth of maybe not wrestling in general, but definitely certain wrestling companies, is just the fact that every babyface is booked like an idiot, and it is really hard to rally behind individual wrestlers right now.
I'm glad you mentioned that spot case. I want to preface this by saying, while I'm recording all of these different segments, I'm recording them like out of order of the way they're being presented, and I'm recording them on different days. And I honestly can't remember what conversations I had on air with people and what conversations I had off air on people. So my brain is just mush at this point.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to clarify: by the time I am recording this episode with Case Lowe, I have seen Full Gear. I may have previously said on this podcast, or I may say later on this podcast, that I have not seen Full Gear yet because I recorded a lot of these on Sunday morning and I didn't watch Full Gear on Saturday night. So I don't want to contradict myself and saying because I might have earlier said I haven't seen Full Gear yet. I have seen Full Gear yet, and I 100% agree with you. I thought the match was pretty good, but I hate that spot in the match where the babyface has the title belt and Jack Perry's doing the totally, yeah, do it, man, hit me, get yourself disqualified, and Daniel Garcia is looking at the crowd, looking at the title belt, looking at Jack Perry, making the I'm so concerned face. It's so overdone in pro wrestling. It is just a cheap kind of reaction to get. I'm never excited about it. I hate the whole, will the babyface cheat? Will a guy get disqualified? Because it's teasing to me is it's like, will they do a really stupid, shitty finish in this match? And that's something I don't want to be teased by as a wrestling fan. Like I'm like, oh man, what they're doing is like, oh, they're teasing that they're going to just totally fuck this match up, which is not what I want to think about when I'm watching a wrestling match. It's different than teasing a near fall or something like that. And so I hated that spot. It seems like it's happening more and more. I wonder like if its roots are related to the I'm sorry I love you. The I'm sorry I love you is more in the melodrama element. This isn't necessarily melodrama. It's more just like cheap storytelling. And your broader point about like the whole like why baby faces suck now, that's really interesting. I think that you're walking a fine line, and I think like the whole Moxley angle currently is an interesting one to use as an example, because like wrestling fans want to cheer for wrestlers who are take no prisoner badasses. There's room for nuance within that character archetype, but that's really what wrestling fans want. And when you have a take no prisoners badass guy, even if he's like morally a heel, wrestling fans are going to gravitate and cheer for that person. And the opposite is you have these to make the baby faces feel in theory more human and more likable, they have to have some sort of conflict about hurting people. But that's really stupid because this is pro wrestling, that people should never be afraid to hurt other people.
Yeah, you would never see a boxer or UFC fighter be afraid to punch somebody in the face. I think, you know, with the Garcia spots specifically, okay, let's say the belt's in the ring. You have two options. Jack Perry can present himself as an open target, and even though he presented that title belt, Daniel Garcia can pick it up and throw it out of the ring and then hit his finisher on Jack Perry, and it could be this great moment. Or because the heel introduced the title belt, Daniel Garcia can use that against Jack Perry, and it can be okay because he's not the one that brought it into the ring. He is getting one over on the bad guy. And I don't know why people seem to think that viewers want this, but I'm not really interested in watching people contemplate or struggle emotionally or figure stuff out. I kind of just want people that know what they want, and more often than not, unfortunately, that's being presented as bad guys and not good guys. I don't need any more emotional depth, for a babyface wrestler than I want to win this match, and the person that I'm wrestling is morally worse than I am. That to me is good enough.
Yeah, and also like, how many times have they done this spot where like the babyface is considering hitting the heel, the heel's opening himself up as a target, and then the babyface actually hits the heel?
Yeah, it's the way we're using babyface right now, I just think is so wrong.
But it's always it's always this crappy patterned spot where like the babyface considers it, the heel says do it, babyface looks at the crowd, looks at whatever object he's holding, usually as a title belt, because it's got to have the dual meaning of like, if I hit him, I won't get this title belt, or if I hit him, maybe I'll have a better chance at getting this title belt. And then they throw it away and they get a big pop from the crowd, or a pop from the crowd, I guess. And like it's like honestly, like if Daniel Garcia just rammed Jack Perry in the head with it, it would have been a crappier finish, but I almost would have liked it more because it wouldn't have been just the same pattern, cheap bullshit that we normally see with these kind of spots.
I agree. It's a spot that needs to die. I'm really not interested in wrestlers having any sort of emotional strife in the middle of title matches. Just try to win the match. It should be presented as
and it's
as
very
a competition.
It's very pervasive too. Like it's everywhere if you watch it, especially in American wrestling. Like obviously it's done a lot in WWE. AEW's used it a lot in different forms. You see it on the indies. Like it's just a really pervasive idea, and I think it, like we've kind of talked about, it gets away from what I think generally most people want to see when they think of like a professional wrestler they cheer for, is just someone that like takes no prisoners and is a badass. Like who's the biggest babyface like in wrestling history?
Hogan probably.
Yeah, it's Hogan, or it's Steve Austin, right?
Yeah.
Like, did those guys ever do that spot? Maybe
No.
Hogan might have did it, but like Steve Austin, do you think he would have done this spot where he had a moral conflict about punishing somebody physically?
And I don't even know if Hogan would have done it with the strict line between baby faces and heels, especially like 80s Hogan. Maybe I'm wrong because that's
stuff that he
exactly.
would do. But I guess my point is like the most successful baby faces in history are generally just these like pretty much like these remorseless badasses. And again, I think there's room for nuance. We don't need every single babyface to be a clone of Steve Austin, but the idea that like we're gonna like the babyface needs to show some sort of restraint is that being almost like a mandatory thing, especially in this era where wrestling fans don't really care about baby faces and heels all that much. It makes it more challenging. And
but I think they do. I think people actually really care about it. They're just not presented with the right options. So we sort of default to the shades of gray thing as okay. But I think people go to a show no matter what level of fan they are, hoping that they have a number of people they can cheer against and a number of people they can cheer for and a number of people they can boo at. And we're not really being presented with those options right now.
Now you're pointing out the you're pointing out the Shawn Michaels spot. This spot definitely did not have this kind of influence, but it's what the spot I remember the most, and it's actually an amazing spot. Is like the Bob Backlund heel turn, like was in 1992, where he finally snaps, locks in the crossface chicken wing, and then he's like collapses in the ring and like is looking at his own hands, like what have I done? That has been mocked and mimicked like a million times since that originally happened.
Oh, it's the career of Johnny Gargano. And I say that as somebody that really liked Gargano for a long time. But no, it's all bad. It's all, community theater level acting. I don't know. To come full circle here as we sort of put a bow on this, Dragon Gate right now. In Dragon Gate, there is always one definitive over-the-top babyface unit. There is always one definitive over-the-top heel unit. There's 3 or 4 units sprinkled in that, depending on the show, depending on the loop they're running, could be babyfaces, could be heels. And when someone turns heel, they mean their actions. They are never contemplative. They are never looking at their hands going, what have I done? When somebody turns heel or somebody does something incredibly heelish in that promotion, they stand by their actions and they mean it. And that is a much better way of doing business, I think, than what's happening in America right now.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thanks a lot, Case.
Thank you.
All right. Next guest up at the batting order here. He is a frequent guest on this show. I'm sure everyone here is familiar with him. He is one of the co-hosts of the Flagship Wrestling Patreon podcast. And he is, but some people call him the most compelling voice in wrestling audio. That would not be me, but that's okay. It is Joe Lanza. Joe, welcome back to the show.
Excuse me, sir. It's the most compelling voice in wrestling media. Okay, that's correction number one. And number two, I feel like the last time I was on the show, I should have never mentioned that I am statistically the most frequent guest on this show, because now I don't think that's true anymore. And I think it's only because you don't want me to be statistically the most frequent guest on the show, because I was touting that on my last appearance. So you've got these clowns
small
like
consideration.
yeah, so now these clowns like Adam, Berger, and whatnot, you're stacking them, and you really just you don't really want to have these people on as much as they're on. You really just want to bump me down in the order of number of appearances.
As I've said on previous editions of this podcast, my real goal is for this podcast to all be Canadians and New Englanders, and like the occasional Irishman popping in. That's pretty much my goal. I would like no one else on the show. But Joe, you have a hot take for us. Can you gift it to us?
All right, yeah. So I'm going historical with my hot take.
Great.
I doubt many others are going historical. As someone who cites 40-year-old references regularly, I figured it would only be apropos if I went with a historical hot take. My hot take is Eddie Gilbert deserves just as much, if not possibly more credit than just about anyone else for the historical significance of ECW. And I think that due to the retelling of ECW history by WWE, and which is largely driven by Paul Heyman, that Eddie Gilbert not only gets shafted on his credit for what ECW eventually became, he gets virtually no credit. He's essentially been erased from ECW history. And when you look at Eddie Gilbert's contributions to that company, I truly feel like if he's never hired by Todd Gordon in early 1993, you and I are not having this conversation, and ECW never achieves the historical relevance it achieves. I think that Eddie Gilbert's brief 6-month stay with the company was highly instrumental in providing the launching pad of what Paul Heyman did later on. In fact, Eddie Gilbert was the one who brought Paul Heyman to ECW to begin with. So you can look at this from a literal sense, but even so, it's what Gilbert did with ECW in those brief 6 months, and it was only a handful of shows that I believe set the deck for how we look at ECW. It would have never became what it eventually became, and with the historical significance that we now know it has without Eddie Gilbert being employed by the company.
If you were to ask like 100 just kind of regular wrestling fans at like an AEW or WWE show, and you ask them like, what years are like the peak ECW years? What years do you think they would say? Just like your average wrestling fan.
Your average wrestling fan would probably say 1996 or 1997.
Mm-hmm. So we're talking a little bit like years removed from the Eddie Gilbert influence.
Oh yeah,
directly.
Gilbert was hired in early 93, and he was gone by September of 93. His last show was Ultra Clash.
And I think as we get further and further away from ECW's existence in real time, and as we get more and more generations of fans like myself, and subsequently younger generations of fans that weren't there in real time to watch ECW, I think that we're like, specifically the period you're talking about, like the early 90s, is going to be largely completely forgotten because, like you said, it doesn't fit into the Paul Heyman WWE narrative of ECW, and that ultimately is going to what people are going to want to listen to.
Yeah, Paul Heyman never acknowledges the era of the company that preceded him. He never even acknowledges the era of the company where he was there, but working underneath Gordon and Gilbert. For obvious reasons. And because of that, WWE doesn't acknowledge that period either. Now, don't get me wrong, that period stunk. You go back and watch that stuff, it's flat out awful. It gets a little bit better when Gilbert is in control, and it would have gotten better if Gilbert stayed. But Gilbert didn't book great shows either. There's no great matches that happened under Gilbert's watch. But what Eddie Gilbert did was raise the profile of what was a very tiny not even regional indie. It was a Philadelphia, it was a city specific indie promotion that Todd Gordon was running bar shows in with all locals. It had no national footprint whatsoever. And he hired Eddie Gilbert. And what Eddie Gilbert did was immediately raise the floor, and he brought in competent wrestlers. He brought in Chris Candido, who was the hottest independent wrestler at the time. And that immediately got attention from the hardcore newsletter dorks, because everybody was aware of how great Chris Candido was and how he was going to become a star. Now, he eventually lost Candido to Smoky Mountain, but he brought him in and he used him. He brought in his brother Doug Gilbert as the Dark Patriot, another good young worker at the time. Who was way better than anybody Todd Gordon had been using. He brought in Shane Douglas, who was between gigs. And he not only brought in Shane Douglas, he convinced Shane Douglas that he would be a great heel. Shane Douglas had never worked heel before. And you look back now, and that sounds crazy, because Shane Douglas ended up being a tremendous heel for ECW. And Eddie Gilbert had the foresight to understand that Shane Douglas could pull off that role. He brought in the guys from Wing in Japan, the Headhunters, and Kraetsch the Terminator and Miguel Perez, who immediately came in and not only had the best matches in the brief history of the company, but it got the attention of the newsletters and the sheets, because the Headhunters were such a unique act for the time, and the wild action that those Wing guys brought to the table. And then he supplemented all that by booking one-offs with big name veteran guys like Stan Hansen and Dick Murdoch and Road Warrior Hawk and Abdul the Butcher. He brought in Tito Santana, even though it didn't work out, but he brought in Tito and made him the world champion. And of course, he brought in Paul Heyman, who came in off the WCW run and the Dangerous Alliance and all of that. And, it was probably the best manager in the business at that time, as some of the other guys like Jimmy Hart and Bobby Heenan were on the downsides of their runs. Jim Cornette was busy running Smoky Mountain. I guess he was still involved to some extent on the manager end, but you get the idea. And Heyman immediately improved the on-screen promos. He used them as an interviewer. He used them as a commentator. And we all know how talented Paul Heyman is. So immediately Gilbert raised the floor on the talent level. And what it did was it got ECW attention in the newsletters and the sheets, which was vital at the time. And then once they got on Sports Channel, they got that exposure they needed, which drew other big name wrestlers that were in between gigs, because they all wanted to work for ECW because they knew it had television exposure. And then
I was gonna say, it also positioned ECW to be the place people could go to as WCW and WWF both went into decline.
Right, because that was a horrible time for the business nationally, and it was another place to work. And just from a business perspective, the two big shows that Eddie Gilbert booked were the two biggest shows in ECW history at that time. Super Summer Sizzler Spectacular drew a $10,000 gate, and then Ultra Clash, which ultimately proved to be his last show, and he quit a couple days before the show. But he did book the show, and he did book the build on television. That show drew 1,100 fans and over $16,000 gate. So, no matter what way you slice it, I really feel like Todd Gordon never would have gotten out of those bars. He never would have been aggressive enough to expand beyond that. He was happy booking his bar shows. And Todd Gordon was using ex-television names like Don Morocco and Jimmy Snuka and Ivan Koloff and Sal Balomo, but only because some of those guys were local and only because some of those guys...
Northeast old WWF wrestlers.
Right. In the case of Balomo and Ivan Koloff, who was living in Maryland at the time and just wanted to keep working. He's paying Koloff $300 a night. And Koloff was insistent on putting over people like Tony Stetson. When Todd Gordon was booking Koloff to win matches, Koloff turned around and said, "What are you doing? I'm at the back end. I need to be putting people over for you." So he taught Todd Gordon how to book from that standpoint and was very giving in doing jobs to guys like Tony the Hitman Stetson. And guys like Morocco and Snuka, they had wives that worked for airlines. So, he didn't have to pay for flights. So those were no-brainers to book those guys. But you were only going to get so far. And when Gilbert came in and brought in all those names that I talked about, a mixture of hot young indie talent, one-offs with big stars, and then other guys like Shane Douglas and Paul Heyman that he knew he could build around, it really took it to another level, and it got them the national attention they needed. And it really did provide the launching pad for what Paul Heyman would take over in September of '93 to what ECW would become in 1994 and beyond. And I really don't Eddie Gilbert does not get the credit he deserves. He and oftentimes doesn't get mentioned at all. And that's something I really want to change with Jovember to Remember, which we're up to 25 episodes now. The 25th episode was just released on. I don't know when you're going to put this out, but
it'll be out. It'll be out by the time people are listening to this.
Sure. So on November 22nd, episode 25 went out, and that happens to be the review of Ultra Clash 93. The show where Eddie Gilbert had quit a few days earlier and he said his goodbyes to the fans. So you get the whole story behind that. But think about that. I did 25 episodes of Jovember to this point, which covers the entire history of ECW, including a 4-hour Eddie Gilbert mini documentary, which is part of the series. I guess it's not mini if it's 4 hours covering his entire career.
I believe an award-nominated.
Listen, runner-up to Wrestling Observer newsletter, runner-up best documentary of the year last year. Only behind the Geeks on Vice. What's that called?
Dark Side of the Ring.
Yeah, Dark Side of the Ring. So yeah. Anyway, 25 episodes, 4-hour Eddie Gilbert documentary. Think about this. That's well over 30 hours of audio dedicated to 1992 and 1993 ECW, and quite honestly, with all of the ECW books and documentaries and everything else that's out there, over the last since the company has closed, I don't believe anyone has covered that period of the company as extensively as I have.
It's a really overlooked time period, and it's one of the things you're doing, and obviously more work than anybody really in preserving like that level of history, which in a lot of cases is like the true history of ECW and the true roots of ECW and everything like that. And it does bother me that, like, if we were to go back to like the hypothetical like 100 random wrestling fans, if I asked them like who is more important to ECW's success, Bubba Ray Dudley or Shane Douglas, I think way more people would say Bubba Ray Dudley, and that's obviously very wrong.
They'd credit him over Gilbert, and I think you got to put Gilbert no lower than number 3. There's Todd Gordon, there's Paul Heyman, obviously. I mean, I sincerely believe without those 6 months of Eddie Gilbert showing Todd Gordon that it could be done, that we are not having this conversation and that nobody even remembers ECW, and it just fades away with all of the other Northeastern regional indies of the time, whatever Dennis Coraluzzo was doing or whoever else.
Promotions that literally nobody knows the name of.
Right.
All right, great. Can you give me a few minutes on the Rams season?
No, I mean, again, I don't know when this is going out. We're 5-5. We got a huge game against the Eagles coming up. The NFC West is going to be a dogfight. The Rams have the toughest schedule to finish. They had the toughest schedule to start. It got a little soft in the middle, but now because they got to play the Eagles, they still have to play the Bills, and then of course they have the division games. It's a little soft with the Jets and the Saints. Now, in my view, the Jets game and the Saints game are the two biggest games. They have to win those, because if they lose either of those games, I think they're done, because realistically, they're probably going to split the rest of those games at best, the division games and the games with the Eagles and the Bills. So oddly enough, those games against the lousy Jets, who I was 100% wrong about, I have to take that L. The lousy Jets,
you know what? That's like, I think people that were, and I was actually listening to the Simmons podcast like a few minutes ago before, when I was running some errands before we recorded this, and like Bill mentioned, like he picked the Jets to win the AFC East, but I think everyone was aware of this potential terrible season by the Jets, even if you were high on them. Like,
sure,
it's not a shock that this happened.
I agree, but I'm not going to be a coward and hide behind that. I thought Rodgers was going to be really good, and he's just been average at best. You
wanted Rodgers to be so good to stick it to the haters.
I wanted to stick it to people. Yeah. Like, I don't care about Rodgers myself, but I liked that other people hate him, and I like that his success annoys people. But no, I thought he'd be better than this. What worried me about the Jets immediately was early in the season when they were losing those low-scoring, close games. Those are the kind of games they were losing without Rodgers. And if you could lose those games with Tim Boyle and Wilson, those are the games that Rodgers had to win, and he wasn't winning them. And I was like, all right, they're in trouble. And now the defense isn't as good as people thought they were going to be either. So that's just been a mess, and I have to take the L. I thought they were going to be much better than that. But my point is, the game against the Jets and the Saints, oddly enough, to me, I view them as more important than the games against the Eagles and the Bills.
Because those are games you're like in your mind.
Gotta have them.
If you're looking at like, all right, how are we getting to 8 wins? How are we getting to 9 wins? Whatever you need. Like those
have to have those.
Those are green check marks.
Similar to the Pats game last week. Those are gotta have them games, and the Rams are a team that can beat anyone or lose to anyone. So you can't overlook the Jets, and those are the ones they gotta have, because if you get those, you can lose to the Bills, and it's not damaging.
Yeah, that NFC West is really interesting to me because I think the Niners are not a good football team.
The Niner championship window to me is closed. That doesn't mean they can't win the division. That doesn't mean they can't even win a couple playoff games, but their championship window closed in overtime of the Super Bowl earlier this year. That was it.
Yeah. And then you're talking about the Seahawks, who I think the Rams are better than Seattle.
I do too.
And
I think Arizona doesn't get enough respect. I mean, look, they win close games. And their offense they have a great running game. And I don't know if people understand how effective their running game is. And what that does is it opens things up for Kyler Murray to work off of play action and move around in the pocket. Arizona is not, they may ultimately, they could ultimately end up finishing in last place, right, in a tight division. But I think they're better than people think. And they're the team that no one ever brings up in the division. And I could see them winning it. The one team I can't see winning it is Seattle. I think Seattle is a notch below the other three, but just like a half a notch. It's not like there's any kind of wide gap. But we'll see how it plays out.
You watched my team this week. What was do you have any assessment?
I love Drake May. I think Drake May played his best game against the Rams. I don't hold these late interceptions the last couple of weeks against him. He's a rookie quarterback. He was trying to make a play in overtime the week before. You can't kill him for that. And he was trying to make a play against the Rams at the end of the game in a 4-down situation. He threw the ball down the middle of the field and he got picked. It happens. He played an exceptional game against the Rams. He was killing us on 3rd down. What I love about Drake May, everyone talks about his ability out of the pocket and all that, and that's great. It's his composure, especially as a rookie. You look at Daniels in Washington and you look at Drake May, and I think what sets them apart from some of these other rookies is their obvious composure. Whereas you have Caleb Williams, who I like, and I'm not, but he holds the ball forever. There's a lack of composure there with Caleb Williams, where he takes so many sacks because he just holds on to the ball. But May, he has the composure of a veteran. And as a Pats fan, you have to love that. And you have to be excited. So look, it's the Pats. They need to put weapons around them. That's no secret. The head coach is learning. Let's lay off of him. I could pick on him for 15 minutes, but I'm not going to do that. There were brains spilling all over the field at the end of that game because McVay at times just cannot run a game. I've said that forever. I love McVay, but he struggles running a game. And your coach was equally bad at the end of that one. It was just it was a coach off in terms of guys who struggle to run a game. So it was ugly.
The May praise is obviously music to my ears. I think this has been a really, really exciting season as a Patriots fan, despite the poor record, solely because of how much fun May has been to watch, just as a playmaker, even though there have been plenty of rough spots throughout the season. And I'm excited for this off season. I'm excited to go into the draft with whatever pick we have. It's so much more fun when you feel like the quarterback question is solved, which it's not 100% solved. There's still development. And we've definitely seen quarterbacks look promising as rookies and then not totally deliver. You only have to go back to Mac Jones, who made the Pro Bowl as a rookie, and to see where that went. But I'm excited for all right, if we get a high pick, we can maybe trade down and get a tackle and get more stuff. We've got a bunch of cap space, even though there's a lot of questions, I think, with the coaching and how the organization has been run. It's definitely a really exciting time. I thought your team, this was like a get right week for them in terms of just they played that awful game against Miami, which was as bad as I've seen a relatively healthy Rams team play. And then he came back. It was probably Stafford's best game of the season. The defense looked pretty good. It felt like, Kupp and Nakua looked like they were back at full strength for the most part. Both of them had big games. So it felt like a check mark week for you guys. If you guys had lost that game that week, I think it'd be really difficult to see them making the playoffs, even though they wouldn't be that far behind just because
had the Patriots come back and won, the Rams season was over. And Jared Verse, as great as he's played and as much as I love him, that personal foul, and we're getting deep in the weeds here, but that personal foul penalty, Rams are up 2 scores. They make a play on 3rd down. The Patriots are going to punt back to the Rams, down 2 scores. I think it was late 3rd quarter or early 4th quarter. Jared Verse gets a dumb dead ball personal foul.
Yeah, he's like yanking a guy off of the pile. Like guys were kind of pushing and shoving, and he like grabbed a Patriots player by the horse collar and yanked him backwards.
Jesse, the game is over if he doesn't make that penalty.
Yeah.
We all know that, and that opened up the door for the Patriots to climb back in, and that dumb penalty by Jared Verse could have ended the Rams season. If I were Sean McVay, if he had any guts, okay, you got to fine him and you got to bench him for a half this week. I'm serious. I don't care how good he is. That's a rookie player who's out of control who almost cost you your season. I haven't been that irate at a football player in probably 20 years. I mean, that penalty set me off. I'm slapping walls in the house because now you guys of course, the Patriots offense wakes up and you start making this huge comeback, and it never should have happened. I was so upset.
I was very upset with the free play that Drake May had that they ruled dead.
Oh, the NFL needs to get more consistent on that.
I understand there was a rule because the Patriots offensive lineman, I believe, touched the guy.
Him. Yeah.
Which means that the play has to pull dead. But I was like, when he got that free play, I like stood up off my couch. I'm like, free play. And I'm like, I'm ready for him to just, throw it 70 yards downfield to see what happens. And it's the letter of the law. I get they ended up calling it correctly.
On that one, they called it correct. You're right. On that one, he did touch him, but it is inconsistent. There were the Seattle Rams game. It happened twice where Geno got the free play, and it almost seems, and except in the case where there's touching, like in this case, it almost seems arbitrary as to whether the referee feels like the defender has a free shot, whether they blow the whistle or not. And what's going on is a lot of defensive players are assuming the whistle's going to be blown, and they stop playing because they so often blow the whistle on that now. I think that's something the competition committee has to look at in the offseason and come up with a consistent standard. And the best way to do it, I think, and fans aren't going to like this, is just to deem all of those plays blown dead. At least because that's the only way to make it consistent. I know we all love the free play, but there's such inconsistency to it that it's causing issues in the games, and I hate it. And I'll give you another quick one. I know we got to wrap this up. I'll give you another quick one.
Yeah, nobody cares about this, by the way.
No one cares. They got a ban punching the ball out as a defender with the closed fist that Peanut Tillman made famous about 10 years ago. And now everybody does it with the closed fist to knock the ball out of the ball carrier's hand, because we're seeing guys get punched in the ribs every week now when they miss the ball. We saw Josh Allen get punched in the face in the Chiefs game. It's gotten completely out of control. It'd be very easy to litigate. If you make a closed fist, just like pro wrestling, closed fists are illegal. You cannot close your fist and punch at the ball. Open hand, karate chop, whatever else you want to do.
The Masanobu Fuchi, open hand.
You could do the Tenzan chop. I don't care what else you do. But these closed fists, to me, it's against the spirit of the game to make a close. It's not a football move. It's like the old Deacon Jones head slap. At some point, they said, you know what? It's against the spirit of the game. It's not a football move. No more head slaps. No more closed fist punching the ball out, please. And I'll give you another one. This one's not serious, but it's serious to me, but everyone's going to laugh at me. I propose, because I'm sick of these running quarterbacks, just like in your backyard, I propose a 10 Mississippi rule. If at 10 Mississippi, the quarterback has not left the pocket, he can't run into an automatic sack. We can leave it at that. I'm sick of it. I'm sick of the defense doing everything right, and then these dopey quarterbacks just slip out of the grip of the defensive end and trot 11 yards for a first down. Nothing makes me more frustrated watching a game on Sundays than seeing that.
Well, nothing is more frustrating as any fan is watching a defensive tackle look like he's going to get a sack, only to feebly chase after a much faster quarterback. Who then gets a big gain.
10 Mississippi, Jesse. 10 Mississippi.
My personal unpopular rule change is I want the quarterback sneak outlawed.
I could get with that. Run a real play.
It's a stupid play. They never know where the ball is.
Right.
Like in
It's a
terms of
guesswork,
spotting
total
it, like
guesswork.
it's just
Yeah.
total bullshit. Like you could run a quarterback power, but like do something where like the quarterback has to at least be like 3 yards behind or 2 yards behind the
Right.
center if he's going to run the ball or something like that.
Right, because whenever that play is close, it's a guess.
Yeah, because it's just guy goes into a pile, and with the tush push, there's even more guys now. Just like the entire team is just within this tiny box. There's no way the refs know how to accurately spot it. It's not compelling to watch. It's not a good play. All right, we're gonna wrap this up. Thanks a lot, Joe.
Yep.
All right, our next guest at this time, he is a frequent contributor. I haven't done the full analysis, but he may be the most prolific person to ever appear on the show outside of the original guest, the original co-host, Jason Umpresser. It's Adam Berger. Adam, welcome back to your familiar stomping grounds of the Gentleman's Wrestling Podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me again. Really excited to do this.
Yeah, so what have you been cooking up for us? What is your hot take?
Okay, so this won't be a surprise to you. I've mentioned this before in passing, but I am taking this opportunity to dive into why I think Bill Goldberg is one of the most overrated wrestlers and wrestling stars of all time.
Yes, let's hear it.
So, okay, so we talk about this in the Hall of Fame every year, and it comes up, when we're having our Hall of Fame conversations. But I'm just going to take the opportunity to really dive into this and just kind of lay out why I feel this way about Goldberg. The first thing is he didn't, as heralded as he is as this big draw for WCW. Basically, his title reign coincides with the decline of WCW. So basically, as soon as he wins the title, and then shortly after that, like everything's going downhill. Even during his title reign, like every single pay-per-view he headlined, or could be argued as headlining for WCW, did better the prior year. And then his title reign ends at the end of '98. And then once we get into '99, after the first few months, which are actually good when he's no longer the champion, from a ratings and a pay-per-view buy rate perspective, then it really just starts to accelerate. Now, the decline starts to accelerate. Now, it's true WCW never went to Bill Goldberg as champion, and maybe they should have. And it's also true that, perhaps he could have been booked better. But, for a guy who's was never heralded as this amazing worker who made other people look better, or just someone who always had stellar matches, although admittedly he did have the greatest squash match of all time against Laparca. But it just stands out this is supposed to be this otherworldly crowning achievement, and once you dig into it, it's honestly pretty underwhelming.
Yeah, I think a lot of this, and a lot of Goldberg legacy and how he's remained a tantalizing topic of conversation. There are two things. The first is that just in general, 1998 is really the most overcovered year of wrestling history. And it is an extremely important year of wrestling history. The narratives are right there. WWF regains its footing as the number one company, and WCW begins to fall apart. But just subsequent to that year, we as wrestling fans have just been constantly bombarded with analysis, historical lookbacks, debates, books, television specials, podcast series, YouTube documentaries, whatever you want to go to, just all about 1998. And just so anything that happened in that year, in that time period, 1998, 1999, and obviously Bill Goldberg and his run and him peaking as world champion being a major part of that, it has kind of allowed his legacy to just keep going in a way that for a similar wrestler, the Ultimate Warriors has not. Before the Ultimate Warrior was kind of brought back into the WWF fold, and then he died really shortly thereafter, you had very little Ultimate Warrior conversations. And in hindsight, people start talking about him more. Goldberg, he's always remained this kind of huge topic. And the other part is he's probably the ultimate what could have been wrestler. And that always becomes a difficult kind of conversation. Like what you're saying is based on like, well, let's look at what actually happened and like how he was actually booked and what actually happened for WCW when they pushed Bill Goldberg. And I think a lot of people, the counterpoint to that would be like, well, Adam, that's because WCW was incompetent. It doesn't have anything to do with Bill Goldberg, which is true to an extent. But again, we're talking about things that happened, not things that could have been. But I think that's such an interesting topic for some people to talk about. Let's fantasy book Bill Goldberg's run with more competent creative. And that's kind of kept his legacy and the discussion about him and discussion of him as a major star at such a prominent level in a way that you don't really see from most other wrestlers.
Yeah, for sure. And I think what his comeback run in 2016, 2017, somewhere around there, that was like that drew well from a ratings perspective, and I think that was in large part because people still wanted more from him, right? They were left wanting more because his runs were so short. My counter to that, though, is basically after that initial like 6-month run where he wins the title from Kevin Owens, squashes him after he squashed Brock, and then has another match with Brock at Mania. He doesn't really mean anything in WWE after that. Like they just bring him in to do Saudi shows, and
yeah, it's it's a typical nostalgia run, right? It draws really big at first, and then that impact peters out as people kind of realize, okay, the nostalgia's over. We saw Bill Goldberg spear and jackhammer somebody, and he even won a title belt. But it's not like there isn't really any real big like creative effort put into him. It's just like, here's Bill Goldberg. And obviously it wasn't like he developed a new persona or a bunch of interesting new wrestling moves. He was still extremely formulaic. He has the match against The Fiend. He has the match against The Undertaker, which are both like kind of comical matches to different degrees. But yeah, it's a nostalgia act. It draws big at first and then peters out.
Well, I don't know if it was just nostalgia though. I think that's just him, because like
all
his
that's
runs,
part of it, right? That's part of it. He actually like became a more interesting he was a more interesting promo in like 2016 when he came back than like he ever was like in WCW.
Yeah, definitely. But he's just such a unique figure. He's kind of, the way I think about him, he's kind of like a bazooka, where like you have to aim him perfectly right, and if you do, it's devastating. But if you're a little bit off, like it doesn't, like you're just gonna miss entirely, because I don't think there's ever been a top star that was so heavily reliant on their booking and creative as Goldberg was, and on their opponents. Because like if he didn't have the right opponent, like the match was not going to go well. And if he wasn't like booked perfectly to his strengths, like it wasn't necessarily going to resonate and people weren't going to care.
Well, and again, this is why his legacy continues, because he's so interesting to talk about the way we are now. Like with Goldberg, it's like to book him successfully is actually very simple, right? He just has to win all his matches in dominating fashion for the most part. The challenge with booking Bill Goldberg is that there's really no flexibility in there to do anything else. Like,
right.
Like unless you have like a Brock Lesnar type, who's a guy who's been built up to a similar degree, and you can kind of have them do these short sprints where, people are interested in these two unstoppable forces hitting each other. But there's nothing you can really do. He's so inflexible, like from a storyline perspective, from an angle perspective. There's just not a whole lot you can do with a Bill Goldberg. Even though I think he's very like he's very simple to book in the way of like, I know how to draw money out of Bill Goldberg. You just have him win all his matches. But at the same time, the shelf life to extend his run is so limited because the flexibility, him as a character and as a performer, just isn't there.
Yeah, and he also came in at a very interesting time where, even though like most of his streak is like squashing people they weren't pushing, but a lot of those people they weren't pushing anymore were people that they had pushed before, and wrestlers that had equity from being on TV for years and years as credible opponents, like Ming the Barbarian, or William Regal, or like Mongo had equity because they had built him up, and like Renegading Glacier they had given up on at that point, but they still like they had pushed them hard before, so they still like kind of meant something. And so it's just like you basically just need a treadmill of opponents for him to kill. But that's also kind of puts the shelf life on it because, okay, if he just kills everybody, then who's left for him to work with? So
And like
I just
his,
think there's some inherent issues with
yeah,
him that
and his like, and for a vast majority of the streak in his, rise on top, he is not in a prominent push position in WCW, right? He's not getting all this TV time. He's not, main eventing shows. It's part of the build is that it happened in the background. He just showed up one day and he started beating people. And it took a long time for him to kind of register on the radar screen for the bigger wrestling stars. And once that happens, I guess some of his faults are exposed. At the same time, you can't have any Bill Goldberg conversation without just pointing out like how truly terrible the creative was around him.
absolutely, absolutely. But I guess what I would just ask, and this is something I've thought about too, who looked good working with Goldberg? Like who came out looking better going in? Yeah, I'm coming out of it than they did going into it. There's only like two guys I can think of.
Yeah, like this is like a Scott Steiner match or a DDP maybe.
Yeah, I think like DDP. I guess the Steiner match was actually surprisingly good. The 2000 Fall Brawl match, and yeah, DDP Halloween Havoc '98. You could say Brock and the Mania that they did, which actually was definitely an excellent match. But that's the thing; it's like it's a very short list of people that like had really good matches and came out looking good after working with Goldberg. So he's just someone who, yeah, he could be effective, but basically you had to allocate like all your resources into him and just sacrifice so many people in order to get that effectiveness out of him.
Yeah, and that's an attrition that comes and it becomes almost like damaging where it's like, yeah, he can draw big and yeah, he can do this, but like again, like his shelf life, like if you're gonna make him the world champion, it kind of defeats not defeats the purpose, that's not the right word, but it just makes it so difficult to book him. And we've seen this. He's not the only person that's been like this. It's like there's kind of a reason like the Undertaker, didn't have the world title a lot during like his first like 8 years of his career because it was kind of weird for the Undertaker to be world champion. He was like this infallible monster. It was kind of messed up.
Yeah, exactly. And I just think I think that's why we saw him come and go a lot. I think both him and the people in charge kind of realized that, which is probably why sometimes his effectiveness would wane, and he'd be like, "Oh well, I don't know if it's really worth my while to stick around," and they would say, "Well, I don't know if it's worth our while to have you stick around either." So,
What if
yeah,
he,
just
what if
interesting
he
thing I've been thinking
what if
about.
he wore a wig for like all of this?
Well, Goldberg with hair. Let me think about that. Well, yeah.
Well, wasn't that was like an angle in like when he came
Yeah,
back in
no.
2003.
It was. We definitely, they definitely tried that. Clearly didn't work. I was just picturing like that old, like some Michael Hayes being like, "We need you to grow out your hair." Uh-huh. That'll give you some more longevity, brother.
Yeah, kind of weird that like Hulk Hogan bald, Steve Austin bald, The Rock bald, Bill Goldberg bald. Yet it's a hair business.
Not really. Us bald guys have charisma, Jesse. We do.
All right, Adam. Thanks for coming back on the show.
Thanks for having me.
All right, our next guest at the time returning to the broadcast. She is a fellow Bostonian. We adopted her from Long Island, New York, and she also joins me in the club of people with very commonly misspelled first and last names. It's Mora Johnston.
Hello. It's a beautiful club. One we can be misunderstood right off the bat. It's really nice.
See, the issue with both of our names is we both have first names that people like to spell in the more uncommon way, right?
Yes.
People love to spell my name Jessie, despite the fact that Jesse is by far the more common spelling.
Yeah.
And then on the flip side, our last names are one letter different than extremely common last names, which makes it more difficult.
Yep, that one letter. It makes all the difference on municipal records and other things.
Yeah, my IRS statement was wrong for a long time. That's what I'll say. That's
Oh,
like something
wow.
that probably shouldn't be wrong, but it was.
That's I once had my accountant type my social security number wrong, but that got fixed. So yeah.
Someone else got it wrong. Someone else got a but yeah, Mara, what's your hot take for us?
Thinking about just like the last 5 years that AEW has been in existence and like thinking about sort of the media landscape in general, I think it's really difficult for any new entity to get off the ground, right? Like I write about music, so I think about this all the time. And it's like you had, this year you had Chapel Roan and Shabuzi, who sort of emerged from, out of not nowhere, but definitely were new artists. But like if you look at most of the artists who have broken through in the past couple of years with big records, it's like Sabrina Carpenter, and this album, Short and Sweet, is actually her 6th album. Olivia Rodrigo, she was on Disney shows for years, and she wrote songs about Sabrina Carpenter because that whole driver's license breakup was about Sabrina Carpenter. Anyway, and even like Post Malone, who's a new artist to the country world, but who has been around forever and who was definitely like getting industry plant eyebrow cocks from me when I first saw him open for Fetty Wap, and he played White Iverson twice during his half-hour set. So I feel like that's the sign that like people are really into you, or it's like, okay, well, you need to fill a half hour, and like we know you're a new artist and nobody knows you, so play your song twice. Like, why not, right? I mean, Anyway, the point is,
I was gonna say I actually read today like this is Shabuzi's 3rd album was what Tipsy was on.
Yeah. And like Chapel Roan's been putting out records, for like a lot of the songs on Rise and Fall of the Midwest Princess like were originally released in like 2020, 2021. But it's just that her old label didn't know how to market her. And obviously she broke through with really great live shows, and being on the Olivia Rodrigo tour helped a lot, I think, because when I saw her in April, like the crowd, arena shows, it's really hard to get the crowd into an opener, and the crowd loved her and were singing along and doing the Hot to Go dance. And that was in April, before she played Coachella, before Good Luck Baby came out. And I feel like that was the sort of thing where she did, like, she's a great performer, great songs, and like that groundwork that she did on the Olivia tour set her up for Coachella being her big splash, and Good Luck Babe just being the first of many singles of hers that took over. But I bring this up because I feel like it is a testament to how impressive what AEW has done over the last 5 years is. And like, people will be like, oh, well, it's on TBS and TNT. And, yeah, there are lots of shows that are on, these channels that are even more major than the T-nets, but they don't get the traction that AEW did. And I feel, and like, I know, that ratings have been down, and like I am a rating skeptic. I think I have said this because the way that the ratings are measured is very, very flawed in an age of multiple ways to watch TV and multiple options for watching TV. Like I have been watching Cheers for the last 5 weeks just on endless, stream, and that wouldn't count anywhere, but it's something that I'm sure I'm not the only one doing that. And so I guess, I know that I just feel like the discourse is so broken in a way that like I think engenders this kind of response from people that sort of unfair. And that's why I think the Costco guys match on Full Gear was actually a good thing, because people tuned in, and like it was, this very fun atmosphere where people were into it, and like he was, so gung-ho and like on a broken foot too, which kudos to him. And I guess I just feel like it's nice to see, that kind of like expansion of the fan base. That I know that there are some purists out there who, are kind of like horrified by it or whatever, even though the match I think did what it needed to do. And I feel like, if I don't know, because it's going to be weird in January. Like I think a lot of people in January are going to be like bereft when they don't have ratings to fight over, because Max is going to kind of eat into that, right? And
People aren't going to be weird. They're going to be talking about how the ratings went down.
well, yeah, I know that's true. That, you know what, people probably will do that. But yeah, you're right. You're right. God, I
Get
was
ready for that.
hoping that
Strap
they
in
just
for
get
that.
sad and be quieted and, you know, from their despair. What am I going to rant about now? Anyway, but you know, it's just I just feel like people need to sort of see the forest for the trees, and I guess that's one of the reasons that like I'm sort of cool right now on a lot of wrestling punditry in general, because I feel like it's just operating in this very old media environment that I think was proven to be non-existent with the, you know, with the presidential election and how the two campaigns sort of went about trying to get people interested in voting, where it's a lot more, you know, you need that kind of like specialized and thing. There aren't a lot of mass entertainments anymore. There just aren't. There are some. There's the Eras Tour, sure, but even these like big events, you know, they're much more sort of casual. I don't know, they're much more sort of casual, I think. And
yeah, I mean, I'll tell you right now, two examples you've already mentioned. I did not know who the Costco guys were before they were
yeah,
on AEW.
yeah,
I didn't know who he was. I didn't know who the Rizzler was. I didn't know any of that. I'm not on TikTok. Like, and I kind of been asking my friends about like that over like the last few weeks when they've kind of been featured. I'm like, hey, do you guys know who the Costco guys are? And, you know, these are guys my age, like, men and women, around, 28 to 32 years old. And half of them have been like, oh, no, what, the Costco guys? Who's that? And the other half have been like, oh, yeah, the Costco
yeah,
guys. Of course I know who they are. So I always kind of I found that kind of interesting. And
yeah,
the other
yeah,
thing was like, I didn't know who Shibuzi was
yeah,
until like a month or two ago, where that was like a whole like I'm like, oh, okay, there's a Nigerian American country music artist, and he's had the number one song in America for like the last 4 months.
yeah, yeah. Well, and it's interesting too, because like I first heard of him because on another thing that, you know, I do, like back in the day, you know, I would watch MTV, you know, all the time because I wanted to hear new music and I wanted to see videos, and like, you know, MTV's programming was a little more adventurous than radio stations, etc. This was obviously 30 plus years ago. But MTV has all these fast channels, right? You know, free ad supported television that are on Pluto TV and the Roku channel and all that. So I was watching one of the MTV ones. It was either their pop station or what they call the Spankin' New Station, which is just like new artists. And I saw I saw a video by Shibuzi, and I was like, huh. And I have a friend, my friend Nick. He writes a lot about country music, and he writes a lot, especially about like this new crop of artists. You know, sort of like Lil Nas X was one, but then there was also Blanco Brown. But these like younger country artists, a lot of whom are Black, and they're like, you know, bringing in like elements of hip hop. Like Kane Brown is another one.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
he, you know,
Jelly Roll, right? Like,
well, Jelly Roll's a little different because like the sonics in his music are much more like new metal-y, or like I guess more post grunge than new metal. Like he's like
gross.
I saw him a couple of months, I guess last month now. And he's like, you know, it's very like Nickelback-y, his music, Nickelback, Creed, that kind of post grunge yarling.
Yeah, I believe they call that butt rock, but go ahead.
Butt rock, well, I have a different definition of butt rock, but mine is like from the, you know, spandex era. But like I think that but oh, so I texted my friend, I saw a video by Shibuzi, and I texted my friend Nick, and I was like, have you heard of this guy? And he was like, no, but you know, I sent him the YouTube clip, and he was like, oh, I'm gonna keep an eye on him. And then like literally 2 weeks later, he was on Cowboy Carter, like literally. And I was like, okay, so I guess this is a thing. And then, you know, that was sort of the beginning of his rise. And Tipsy, which I think, you know, him sampling Jaquan's Tipsy, like, you know, it's one of those things where it triggers that kind of nostalgia beacon in a lot of brains. And they're like, oh, I think I know this song, because they know the song that was on, you know, pop radio back in 2000, I think it was 2006. But yeah, like, and like even the TikTok, the Costco guys are such a good example, because like TikTok is so just like completely fragmented. Like it's so like all over the place, you know. I mean, I have like creators that I like, but like sometimes I won't see them for a week and they've been posting new videos the whole time, but it's just like the For You page just sort of like shakes stuff out. And normally I'm very against algorithmic timelines, and I think that algorithmic timeline sorting has actually been one of the worst things to happen to the world, not just social media, but like the world, because of the way that it's like really funneled these people into people in general into their, you know, little niches where they sort of get more radicalized and everything. And they, you know, I mean, Cass Sunstein wrote about this in Republic in his book Republic.com from like 20 or so years ago. And, you know, he talked about how he was talking about politics, but you know, how like people will go into these like private and semi-private groups, and because they're surrounded by people who mostly share their views, they will get into these like cults of more radicalized beliefs. And you see that definitely in, you know, TikTok spaces, and, you know, where people become like obsessed. Like there's this one like woman in Buffalo who's this like dating vlogger in Buffalo, and like there's this whole cult around her. She has a subreddit about her, you know, and it's like these things that just crop up that people get obsessed with. And obviously, also at the same time, it's easier to kind of coalesce a group around negative attention than positive attention, because it's a lot easier for a person to be like, I'm not interested in that, and put their arm out and like be at arm's length, than it is to like take a chance and open yourself up to something.
Yeah, free
So,
Karen Reed, right?
Karen Reed, Karen, yeah. Oh my God. Well, I haven't followed that at all. Like
No,
I've just
that's okay. That's a reference. That's a reference that only a few people will get, but they'll know exactly what we're talking about. To kind of steer this back towards wrestling, like you mentioned, like
yeah.
the lack of mainstream like mass entertainment platforms, and like kind of AEW, while not necessarily, we talk about like mainstream attention and things like that, while not necessarily hitting that in a lot of conventional senses, the fact that they've been as successful as they have has been an underappreciated goal. I mean, you can just look at all these all of these, attempted spring football leagues that have popped up over the last 10 years.
Absolutely.
And,
Yes. Yes.
those have had plenty of major network backing, more than TBS and TNT. We've seen major networks put them on, and they have not been successful, despite, having a product that presumably has way more mass appeal than pro wrestling in terms of football. But the attempts to start an alternative organization like that, and I mean, the churn of network television alone, if you just look at like how many shows, how much stuff is just thrown at the wall, and how much money is wasted by all these television networks, the idea that like the success that AEW has had is really underappreciated if you don't understand that context.
Yeah. Well, and even look at like Apple TV, right? Like Apple TV is a venture with so much money, and they spend so much money on the biggest stars in entertainment doing their shows. And so many of their shows have just sort of died on the vine, right? And it's not for lack of promotion. Like, they like will go to them. And that's another thing that I think, people are like, oh, AEW should do more media. And I'm like, as somebody who's covered AEW in the media, I don't know. Like, I know that, my stories have been like, obviously they're great because I wrote them, right? But, at the same time, it's like, how much of a difference have they ultimately made? Right? Because people aren't getting their newspapers on their doorsteps anymore. They're going to a website and they're clicking on things, and they have to deal with that like split second cognitive leap where it's like, do I want to click on this? Do I want to click on this thing that's unfamiliar to me?
Yeah, I mean, you can even, like, if you're just talking about like what kind of impact can like positive media coverage or even negative media coverage for entertainment really have?
Yeah.
It kind of pales into comparison to like what you really need to do is like catch on to the algorithm and start a social media trend. Like for all, like WWE has only seen their popularity go up despite really mainstream scrutiny in terms of news coverage about their company.
And they have like, they also have like that fan base that's like talking to each other all the time and getting each other more excited and more sort of, I'm not going to say radicalized, because that's like kind of ridiculous to talk about fandom that way, but more sort of like, group thinky, and more sort of like, oh my God, like they ate or whatever,
Let them cook. Yeah.
Let them cook. Put it in the kitchen. But yeah, I mean, so I think I just think it's interesting, and like it's, there's a lot of, obviously there's a lot of bad faith dialogue out there because because again, like engagement bait has become sort of lucrative in a lot of ways with page views or or likes or whatever being monetized. But I think that what AEW has done is pretty impressive, and like I don't know, I think that a lot of aspects of it, I know that people will talk about how the products has changed and it's not what it used to be, and like I still think that a lot of what made it such an important alternative is still there. Like you have like this diversity in body types, and you have this kind of like, even I know that I think some of the bad faith people have complained about like Mariah May and Mina Shirakawa and the sort of sexual overtones of their stuff. But I mean, it's not, I don't know, that like it just doesn't feel like male gazy the way that like Stacy Keibler did back in the day. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I mean, I've said this before about AEW. I think like people are struggling to have a relationship with AEW that is one that is, this is a product that I'm familiar with that has its certain beats and patterns, as opposed to when it first debuted, when everything was new and exciting.
Yeah,
I think a lot of that stuff that made it exciting 5 years ago when it was new is being taken for granted, and it is ultimately up to the wrestling company to be able to pivot and to find new ways to excite its fan base. But I think what's lost in that is like, yeah, this is a wrestling company that still cares about the actual wrestling portion of the show, which WWE does not. And yeah, we're gonna push. We're gonna go out there. We're gonna have some lucha wrestlers, and they're gonna be allowed to go out there and do their stuff. We're gonna have a guy like Konosuke Takeshita, who's a Japanese wrestler who doesn't speak any English, and we're gonna push them hard, and we're gonna give them plenty of time, and we're not gonna try to change them and things like that. All the stuff that made the company different is still there, even if there are some maybe similarities with the product to WWE that some fans might not care about. But I think a lot of it is just, we now take for granted the position and role that AEW has played in the wrestling space. When it first debuted in 2019, it was like, oh my God, this is such a breath of fresh air. We're now like, okay, what's going to happen? What's new? What's next? And I don't think that's necessarily like a bad thing. Like, fans are always going to evolve their tastes and views, but I think it is something that's probably taken for granted at this point.
Yeah, and like I have 2 points on this. Like, one is that I think the pandemic definitely extended that honeymoon period by a lot, because AEW was something that a lot of people like it. I mean, I used to watch Dark and Elevation with my friend who lives in New York. We would text each other, like, we would set up our TVs and listen to that YouTube countdown music and everything. And I think that that was something that really extended the honeymoon period, because it was like this life raft of sorts during this really, really dark time, right?
Yeah, there was, live entertainment was non-existent for the most part. There wasn't sports. There was certainly nothing
wasn't leaving my house.
Yeah, there was simply nothing to do outside your house, and like having AEW there, they did those shows in the Nightmare Factory.
Oh my gosh, right?
In those buildings, and like I haven't gone back and watched them because I feel like the atmosphere will be so like dire that I'm like, I can't believe this was good. But I just remember, like, you know what? They did the whole thing with the TNT title tournament. They had, they built up Lance Archer doing all these awesome squash matches, and then they had built up Cody for that match. Like, really just like simple booking that was done really well. And those were exciting times. But I do think that it is definitely understated and underrated the success AEW has had in becoming a successful entertainment enterprise, when that is something that's just become extremely difficult to do, even with enormous financial backing.
Yeah. And going to your other point about people being like, okay, it's been 5 years, what's next? I mean, I think that, not to draw another parallel to my day job, but, one thing that's always easy to do is to like hype up the debut album by an artist, but like it's a lot harder for those artists to get coverage for albums 2, 3, and 4, and et cetera. Like you have to kind of wait around for the reunion tour almost, and I think that that's another quirk of the current landscape, is that this newness becomes kind of its own narrative, and then what happens next is either over scrutinized or not scrutinized at all. And I think AEW is suffering from the former. But I think with some people, it might be suffering from the latter too. And they're just like, whatever, like, it's old now. It's old hat. So.
All right. Thanks a lot, Mora. Thanks for coming on the show again.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Our next guest at this time, returning to the broadcast, he is coming to us, of course, from the Junkyard Dog territory, the New Orleans, Louisiana area. It's Suit Williams. Suit, welcome back to the show.
Hello. Thank you, Jesse. Thanks for having me on.
No, and Suit, you told me before we went live that you are a hot take machine.
Absolutely.
I would push back on, like, hot take machines should not be aware that they're hot take machines. Necessarily, there's a self-awareness that comes with that, but I'm excited to hear what you have to say.
Well, there are guys like Stephen A. Smith and like Skip Bayless who know that they're the machine and who know like how the machine works, and they know that like them being aware of it makes the machine work even harder. So it is there is kind of that like zoomed out. I'm aware of myself and what I'm doing, and you're also aware of what I'm doing, and we're both just feeding into this monster.
For sure. So what's your hot take? Give it to us.
I had so many. I narrowed it down to 2. And because this is the 100th episode, and because you were gracious enough to have me on it, I decided that I would give them both to you, and you could pick which one you feel has more juice, has more meat on the bone to talk about as far as a discussion goes.
Okay, let's hear it.
I've got 2. One is a very topical one, and one is a more overarching pro wrestling kind of thing. So the topical one is that I don't believe Roman Reigns is an Observer Hall of Famer. I think this is a hot take because he got in the Hall of Fame. So I'm fighting against the tide here. But I don't think Roman Reigns is an Observer Hall of Famer. That's the first one. The second one, in the more the broader topic, is that I believe that there should be no such thing as a mid-card championship in pro wrestling.
Okay, let's do the latter one, if only because the first one is not a hot take, because this is a podcast that has fought very hard to keep Roman Reigns out of the Wrestling Observer Newsletter Hall of Fame. We were not successful in that endeavor, but it was something that we've pushed, and I have pushed on a regular basis. So I love this second one. So no Intercontinental Championship, no TBS title, no TNT title.
Well, not necessarily that. Those titles can exist. I think that main eventers should be fighting for those titles, or people like in the higher tier should be fighting for those titles, like how it was back in the day, where like you'd have a number 1 champion. Hogan would be your WWF champion, and then your number 2 champ would be Macho Man. It would be Steamboat. It would be Warrior. It would be somebody on that somebody who could main event a show on their own, and you're not disappointed by it.
Yeah, and I think we've seen that throughout WWE history, at least. We've seen like guys with multiple world title wins go on runs with the mid-card titles. John Cena had like a pretty memorable United States Championship run during last decade. Roman Reigns is also U.S. champion for a while. There was a time period during Triple H's reign of terror where he was just the Intercontinental champion. We've seen WWE kind of go back and forth on how they present that title. For my knowledge, for AEW, especially in regards to the TNT title, that's really been firmly cemented like in mid-card status. Like we haven't seen, I don't think, like John Moxley win that title, or MJF win that title, or Kenny Omega win that title.
or even challenge for it.
No, it's like it's not like when establishing the title with Cody, yes, that happened. But outside of that, we have not. That has definitely been firmly planted in the mid card, like you were talking about.
Yeah, and I just don't think that should be a thing. I think these championships are prizes that everybody should be fighting for, and if you don't have one, then you should be going for it. Like, to peel the curtain back, we're recording this after Full Gear but before Dynamite. I
Yeah,
think that MJF should come out on Dynamite and challenge Daniel Garcia for the TNT title, because he's beaten Garcia recently. He beat him at All Out. He came back to jump him before Adam Cole got involved. And I think that, like, paying off that recent history would, like, it would build that match up a little bit, and it would just give a little juice to the title itself and make it feel more important. Because if everybody from top down wants it, then that just makes it matter more.
right. And from a kayfabe perspective, it doesn't really make sense. Like, to have these kind of unofficial boundaries on these titles doesn't really make any sense.
Right.
Like,
And then
we can all kind of use our own logic to kind of show why it's beneficial to kind of have a mid-card title in terms of being a piece to establish wrestlers that are on their way upwards. But at the same time, from a kayfabe perspective, this is a competitive environment where titles are presented as the thing that you want the most. Why is there all these guys who are, really driven, who have succeeded to believe themselves to be the best, yet they're completely ignoring a bunch of the titles that's, in theory, they're supposed to be really trying hard to go after?
yeah, and you could use, like, if the titles were a little more distinctive, and there's a bit of distinction there in regards to AEW's titles, where the international title gets defended, around in the partner promotions, and the TNT titles, theoretically the TV title, Continental title, well, it's got a tournament, but you could kind of establish people's characters in, like, which title they go after. So you could have someone like MJF, who's always, he's big on how big of a star he is. He always talks about the ratings and yada yada yada. He could go after the TV title and call himself, the most valuable wrestler on TV, the most valuable wrestler on TNT, and kind of just establish these, like, sub motivations that are, like, underneath their top motivation, which is to be a champion.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because I think most people, like, if you ask most wrestling fans, they like the idea of a mid-card title, right? Like, if you were to ask them, like,
Yeah.
oh, it's good for the Daniel Garcias and Jack Perrys of the world to be going after these mid-card titles, but at the complete exclusion of your top acts. It also seems like a way to undermine your top acts when you don't have them in the world title picture. But the reason people don't do this suit is because the belief that you need to have one world title, right? And if we have all of our main eventers going after all of our titles, well, do we really have one main title? And how do you make that distinction?
That's a good point. I mean, I think the answer would be to just have less titles then. I don't think AEW needs the 4 men's singles. I think 3 would probably be, like, the sweet spot there. Like, the international and the continental, I feel like those could serve the same purpose and, like, be one in the same.
Yeah, I definitely think that two of the mid card titles could be merged and it would be okay, because then you also got to dump in, like, we see the Ring of Honor title defended, sometimes we see Ring of Honor TV title defended, we see New Japan titles come in and be defended. And I'm not one of those people that's like, oh, the fan base is going to be confused about what these titles are or anything like that. But at the same time, it's like there's just a lot of people with title belts running around. And while I do think they've done a really good job in terms of protecting and establishing the AEW World Championship as the preeminent thing that everyone in the company really wants to do, there are diminishing returns once you get to the non-world titles that we see often on AEW television.
Yeah, I would agree. And then with WWE, they're adding 2 more women's titles this past month. Have you seen this, Jesse?
Yeah, so have they started the Women's Intercontinental Championship, or that's something they're going to be doing?
I think they unveiled it on Monday. I don't know. I didn't watch Raw.
And then there was
it.
a story today that they're also going to have a Women's United States Championship.
Yeah, they already unveiled that. There's a tournament going on for that I think ends at Saturday night's main event, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, they're doing these 5-match pay-per-view shows, so they're going to have like 20 titles and only 5 matches on every pay-per-view show. Like, that's another issue too, because I don't. At least when we're talking about like WWE's women's division, the depth of single wrestlers in that division is definitely not able to sustain so many titles.
Yeah, I mean, well, let's not start, because I'm just gonna end up being mean to people. But yeah, it's just they feel more like things for the wrestlers to feel important than prizes on the show, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but there's an inflation aspect to that, which is like if everyone has a title belt, then no one is a champion, really.
Right.
I definitely think you said it's for the wrestlers to feel better. I also think it's for certain members of the hardcore fan base to feel better if they feel like their wrestler's not being wasted if they hold the title belt, even if that title belt is not particularly prestigious, nor does it guarantee them any real spot on any major cards, which is also part of, I think, the satisfaction, which is like, the Miz can cut his promo talking about how many mid-card titles that he won and things like that. And people can look at that and say like, well, that makes him a Hall of Famer or whatever. So it helps from a kayfabe perspective. If you just want to talk about juicing some numbers and trying to make people feel like a bigger deal, and you could say on the resume that they were an X-time champion of a title belt, regardless of how prestigious that title belt actually was.
Randy Orton is a 15-time world champion, I believe. Do you remember any of them? I remember the first one.
I remember some of them, but yeah, some of these. I think Edge is my favorite because Edge just has so many quick title reigns.
Yeah,
that's like Edge is a 14-time world champion. I'm like, geez, like I don't like how many times did that happen? I mean, but that's all fake bullshit. Like no one cares about Ric Flair being a 16-time champion, which is maybe not even the real number, depending on what definition you're using of title changes and things like that.
Depending on how many times he had to get out of Puerto Rico alive, so we just dropped the belt.
So my hot take here, like any like statistics in wrestling don't mean shit to me. Like world title reigns, length of reign, days as champion, number of times as champion, undefeated streaks, like all that stuff I don't care about.
There is one thing I wish that American wrestling would adopt from, well, one of a few, but regarding this conversation, one thing that I wish America would adopt from Puro is that instead of talking about days as champion, you talk about defenses as champion. Because days as champion doesn't mean anything. You're not defending the title every day.
Nah, especially in WWE where we've seen like the title defended like a couple times a year.
Yeah, like Roman Reigns' 1,000-day defense, and I think Orange Cassidy might have defended his title just as many times as Roman did in like 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's another little thing I would like to see in America. More defense talk, less day talk.
All right, great. Suit. I want to thank you for coming on the show, and thanks again.
Thanks for having me.
All right, everybody, and I am finally here with my final guest. We have run through the entire gauntlet, and waiting for us at the very end of this podcast, the final boss of this podcast experience. She's a freelance wrestling writer and podcaster. She's returning to the show. It's Lyric Swinton. Lyric, welcome back.
Hello, final boss. I like that. That was really cool. Yeah.
So there's a lot of pressure on you. We've had some wild takes so far. I have not told you any of them, but we've had some wild ones. We've had some more moderate ones. So I'm kind of interested in seeing what you have cooking up for us. What do you have?
Wait, can I hear some of the ones? I want to know. Make sure we don't have the same ones.
So I've heard Gato should be fired. That's one. I've heard dislike of the Young Bucks it is largely rooted in misogyny, which I loved. That was from Mora Johnston.
Okay.
I've heard that. I've heard Eddie Gilbert doesn't get enough credit for his role in ECW in 1993. So we've got it's covered a wide range. I doubt you would say something similar to other people.
Okay. Well, now that you put it like that, I think, you know what? I have one. I think that a match should not be judged by its finish all the time.
Oh, this is great. This is
And-
great because
And the reason why, okay, go ahead.
no,
go ahead.
no, you go ahead. You go ahead. Finish.
I was
finish
gonna say the
finish.
reason why I said this is because like I'm sitting at my desk right now and I'm looking at like all my figures that are set up. And so I have the double pack of Mox and Kenny's exploding barbed wire death match.
Mhm.
And I hate that match is remembered as for the finish. The match was great. The actual match was great. The only thing that went bad was at the end.
I'm still sad about it. You
I
reminded me
do
of
think
it.
that they should try it again eventually. I think that they should try it again in Japan. I think that they should do it again in Japan. Try it again.
So from the setup perspective, like the reason you haven't seen this gimmick a lot in the United States or in most places is that you need to have a certain venue to do it in.
Yeah.
And they did it during the pandemic, which was the perfect time to try to do it. I actually wrote an article, people can look this up, it's on Wrestling Inc., about advocating for the exploding match to take place during the pandemic because it was the perfect time. And I believe Tony or Mox or Kenny have said that they're going to try to do it again. They could do it in Japan. I'm thinking the All In show in Dallas and Arlington, Texas this year.
That's fair.
Would be another place because I think it also might have to be out. Like you might want to do it outdoors.
That makes sense too.
Given the amount of smoke that ideally would be coming out of this thing. Obviously, you could probably do the one that they did. They ended up doing at Revolution for it. But I love that match. And like I remember watching it live, and I loved the whole story of like you do the finish, the timer's gonna go off. Moxley is stuck in the ring. He's not going to be able to get out. Eddie comes out, and Eddie's like trying to save him. He can't, and then he's diving on it. I'm like, oh my god, it was such great storytelling.
It was peak drama.
The execution of it was so good, and then the explosion was so minor and not good. And I just like, damn it.
That is my point.
Yeah.
That amazing match, the amazing storytelling, it should not all be discounted simply because of some sparklers at the end. Okay. Was it especially because I've gone and I had an obsession for a while where all I was watching in my free time was exploding barbed wire death matches.
I mean, it's a great way to spend your free time. But.
Especially all Japan, of course, but Terry Funk, Hayabusa, Onita, Tenru, like I was watching all of those famous,
the ones that look good. Yeah,
exactly. And so like I love the match type. I think that is so real. It just feels so and I think that specifically AEW, I think they have the performers, the storytelling methods for it. Like I feel like honestly Hangman and Swerve probably should have had one. But only if they were going to do it instead of the all-out steel cage match, like not both. Like at this point, I felt like one or the other would have been fine. I'm fine with the steel cage match, obviously. But there's so many feuds that I think like it could make so much sense. And yeah, I just hate that it got judged based off that, and it makes me upset.
It technically wasn't even the finish to the match; it was the post-match angle, right? Because the match ended. Yeah,
exactly. The actual match was just not perfect, like well done, amazing. I think that John and Kenny have such great chemistry together when it comes to plunder matches. They get so creative. I just really enjoy it. And so like I said, I went and bought the figure pack. Like I have the figure pack, the 2-pack of from the exploding barbed wire match, because I really, really love that match, and I just feel like it deserves justice.
Yeah, and I think so in that specific example, because of how spectacular the failure was, I definitely think that match has been kind of dismissed historically because it's no longer remembered for anything that happened in the match. It's the match where
Exactly.
the ring didn't blow up like they promised it would, basically.
Correct.
As to your the taking to extrapolate that over a broader point, like I've definitely heard plenty of arguments where, the match was amazing, the finish was bad, but that's okay. And I'm like, the finish is really important. I guess a lot of it.
Okay, maybe I'll be rephrased. I do think that some points we should shame people. We should shame people if the finish is terrible. But I think sometimes, like in matches, and I think probably the finish wasn't the right word, but weapons and like external failings should not define a match. That should probably be it. Like, how many times is it in a match and like, oh, if they miss the table or the table doesn't break, people like take points off and stuff like that. Of just like, hey, that's rock and roll, baby. We just keep going. Like, if the actual action is really good, and I think like, okay, if a table doesn't break here, or if a placement is wrong here, as long as I feel like the intensity and the emotion and the storytelling is still there, and the performers are still rolling through it, I think, I'd give it full marks.
I like that. I like the idea, like, especially when you're talking about like these more external factors that
Yes.
are outside of maybe the wrestler's control, or just, sometimes tables don't break that well. Sometimes like,
Yes.
and it depends. Like there's a spot in the Swerve Hangman match where Swerve does the stomp, like tries to stomp Hangman through the table. And it's like an insanely dumb spot to do. Like the chances of that spot working were so low. Like, but it was still awesome that he did it. Like it did.
Yes.
Like, and people would actually say that the fact that the table didn't break made it look cooler. That stuff, I feel like we should encourage as wrestling fans.
Even
instead
their
of,
third match, the time limit draw, they had problems with those tables like the entire time. And for me, it didn't really take away from the match of just like they wouldn't stay up, like they wouldn't set up or set. Now, I do think it's fair to like, I think that you have to have a trade-off, because I think like if you want everything to be perfect in a match as far as weapons and everything, either one, you have to have somebody else really doing that, whether it's a manager, whether it's a second or something like that. And I think that Prince Nana did that very well heading into the cage match of just, they're trying to choke each other out. Nana's filling the cage with all the weapons, right? Putting all that so like Swerve doesn't have to. Or you can have people literally take so much time trying to set things up, and like that takes away from a match. I will say, like, when you're spending excessive time trying to get things situated, done.
Oh yeah, the setup
like,
phase
it's
and
just,
we're
but
talking about when we're talking about like garbage matches like that, like I think like I personally like just kind of like you got to suspend your disbelief. Like I know people get mad. Oh, the referee was holding the ladder that when
that
Darby.
doesn't bother me. Yeah, that doesn't bother me. Honestly, I like it. I prefer that. I think I'm really glad that we as a wrestling society have started to embrace that. Hold the ladder. I'd much rather somebody hold a ladder than I even saw like in the New Japan Stardom historic crossover event, in the Suzuki versus Great Khan match for the King of Pro Wrestling belt. They're having this hardcore match, and so like they're holding this ladder in place so she can go up top and everything. And so like I don't mind that. Like I don't mind like something that simple, because we've seen too many terrible ladder spots of people breaking something. Like I think about Dante Martin at that Ring of Honor pay-per-view. Was that like last year, like the year before? I'm fine with that.
Wrestling's fake. It's okay. We know
Yes,
it's like I'm all for like, trying to make it look as real as possible and things like that. But like
yes.
I'm okay with the ref holding the ladder. I'm okay with like, oh, this guy was clearly looking like he was gonna catch him. Like, yeah, no shit. So the guy doesn't splat on the
And here's the
floor.
thing,
Like,
we've seen so many times, like I think about like that's how Riho got injured. Because she wasn't caught in a match, and like you saw her opponent not being ready to catch her. I think it's just that simple of just I would, at this point, we've seen so much evidence of why this exists to where I'm not going to argue with it. I think it's a great idea. But I think that when it comes to like the stuff that really out of your control, of just like, all right, so what, the table didn't break? Oh, so what if, the momentum in the ring kind of shifted, like whatever props they had set up or anything. Things happened. I mean, they're human beings stumping around, jumping, flying off things. So like I said, if the storytelling, if everything else is great, I don't think that should take away from a match.
Yeah, I think a lot of times people will focus on booking too, like, oh, I didn't like how the way this was booked, so the match isn't as good. And I feel
Absolutely.
like those are often kind of two different things. I definitely think you got to stick
I
the landing
agree.
sometimes.
I think judging I think we don't do a good enough job of like talking about that. I think a lot of times we judge a match based off of our feelings, but are you judging a match in context of the greater story of like storylines? Or are you judging a match based off simply what happened in the ring from this bell to this bell?
What if we're judging the match on if my favorite wrestler won or lost, and I'm really emotional about it?
I think that's what most conversations end up being, and I just think that it's so reductive. I think it's a very reductive way of looking at wrestling, of like walking away from. So like what's a good example?
Well, it's inability to appreciate like
For
the
example,
art
yes.
separate from your own personal taste or emotion. It'd be like if you're like, man, like I love Lil Wayne, and you were like, Lil Wayne's terrible. What are you talking about? Like, and it's like okay, that's just your opinion. Like, why we're not gonna have a good conversation about that if that's gonna be like the what we're talking about. I feel like that happens the case with
Yes.
wrestling.
I think a good example is the Acclaimed versus Swerve in Our Glory match at All Out. And it was so amazing. And the Acclaimed lost when people felt like they should have won the titles. And so some people might have written off the match because they didn't get the result that they wanted. But that doesn't make the match any less beast.
It's
and
the
it
match.
doesn't make the match.
The whole point of the match was that it was beast. Like, I don't remember before that match a huge groundswell being like, it's the Acclaim's time, they gotta win.
The show that night. And I think also too, when you look at that, how do I say it? In that same vein, it doesn't make the match that they won the titles in better than that first one. Because it was a good match, don't get me wrong. When they finally won the titles at Grand Slam, it was a good one. It was not as good as that All Out match of just result, like the booking doesn't always equate to quality. Like it does not always mean that was like the greatest match ever. Like it just doesn't. And I feel like people just can't get outside of their own feelings and just be like, okay, that was pretty beast. I didn't get what I want. Great example. Even better example. This week, right? Thanksgiving Eve, Dynamite. Jericho versus Ishii. I went into that match ready to shit on it. I'll be honest. And I really wish that Ishii had won, but the match was kind of beast. I can admit that and say that, and also at the same time and say that I did not get my desired winner. The match was kind of cool. I think the ability to juggle two thoughts at one time is something that the wrestling society simply just doesn't have.
I love it. All right. Well, thank you so much for rejoining the show, Lyric.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Hey everybody, my name is Jesse Collings, and I want to tell you all about my show, the Gentleman's Wrestling Podcast, here on the Voices of Wrestling Podcast Network. On the Gentleman's Wrestling Podcast, we do a thorough analysis on the biggest issues and trends within the pro wrestling industry. We talk a lot about pro wrestling media, we talk a lot about fan culture and wrestling's place within general pop culture, and we talk about the broader influences that are shaping the way we discuss and analyze the pro wrestling industry. We've had some of the brightest minds in the pro wrestling intelligentsia on the show, including WrestleNomics host Brandon Thurston, both Rich Kraetsch and Joe Lanza from the Flagship Wrestling Podcast, Trevor Dame from the Through the Years podcast, and a whole lot more. This isn't a show for hot takes. It's not a show recapping the latest episode of television. This is a show focusing on the biggest topics in pro wrestling and doing a deep dive on the real stories behind the surface level analysis you might find elsewhere. The Gentleman's Wrestling Podcast is available wherever you get your podcasts, and we'd really appreciate it if you gave us a try. Thanks.